Alexandria, a gateway to knowledge, stories, and imagination, a digital library without limits, always open, always growing. Subscribe, like, and be part of the journey of discovery.
Chapter 1: Exploration before Columbus, the quest for new lands. The ancient Greeks were not the only ones who believed in a distant land across the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, now known as the Straits of Gibraltar. Other cultures also had legends about a place where only happy mortals lived. Greek poets placed this mythical land in the ocean, which they thought encircled the known world. The Romans shared this belief, and these traditions were preserved during the Christian Middle Ages. Stories were told of adventurers who sought these islands of the blessed, but never returned. In the Middle Ages, sailors were cautious and stayed close to the coast, never venturing far into the open sea. However, by the 14th century, the Genoese and the Venetians, prospering through trade, began to sail beyond the Straits of Gibraltar. Their voyages went north rather than south, and in the year 1318, Venetian sailors successfully reached Antwerp. At the same time, the Portuguese were also exploring and trying to find a sea route to the wealthy Indies. Italian sailors mostly crewed their ships. Meanwhile, the Genoese launched their expeditions. In the late 13th century, 2 Genoese ships passed through the Straits of Gibraltar and never returned. In the early 14th century, a Genoese expedition discovered the Canary Islands, though the explorers confirmed these were not the fabled Islands of the Blessed. Before the year 1335, a Portuguese ship returned from the Canaries with goods and kidnapped natives. In the month of July, in the year 1341, 2 large ships, commanded by a Genoese and a Florentine, reached the Canaries from Lisbon in just 5 days. They stayed there until the month of November. Europeans also stopped at the island of Tenerife, where they encountered fierce, almost naked natives who lived in stone houses, farmed the land, and worshipped idols. In the late 14th century, 13 friars tried to convert the natives of the larger Canary Islands but were killed by the locals. Around this time, the Madeira and the Azores Islands were discovered, though they were uninhabited. The Canary Islands, however, were home to a people called the Guanches. These Guanches lived on 7 islands, but with no means of communication between them, they knew little about one another. Their dialects were so different that they could not understand each other. They grew wheat and barley. On the islands of Gomera and Palma, the natives lived in caves, wore no clothes, and survived on roots and goat's milk. They were dangerous warriors, using stone weapons and spears tipped with horns. The people in the larger Canary Islands were more advanced, with 2 large cities and 33 communities. However, their 2 kings were constantly at odds. The warlike Guanches were eventually subdued, but only after fierce battles. They were agile climbers and fast runners, able to catch hares. When asked about their origins, they would say,
"After our ancestors surrendered, the gods placed us on these islands, left us here, and forgot about us."
The success of Portuguese explorations was largely due to the vision and determination of Prince Henry, the 3rd son of King John I, who later earned the title the Navigator. Despite his thin, unassuming appearance, Henry's greatness lay in his perseverance and strong will. He lived a simple, disciplined life, never drinking wine, and invested his wealth in exploring and conquering the west coast of Africa. Portuguese expeditions began in the fall of the year 1415, but the early sailors turned back after reaching Cape Bojador, afraid to go further due to dangerous waves and rocky shores. In the year 1419, 2 explorers, driven off course by a storm, stumbled upon the island of Porto Santo, already known to the Italians, and from there they reached Madeira, also known as the Forest Island. It was not until the year 1434 that a daring navigator, seeking to regain Prince Henry's favor after falling out of grace, successfully circumnavigated Cape Bojador. To prove his achievement, he brought back flowers from the other side of the Cape. Over the following years, the Portuguese continued their efforts, pushing further and further. On one occasion, they returned with fishing nets from the locales, proving that the lands beyond the Cape were inhabited. Soon, they reached regions rich in gold dust and other valuable goods, which were offered to Prince Henry in his honor. Given the enormous cost and effort of these voyages, the focus was on profit, not scientific discovery. The expedition soon became very lucrative, with ships returning loaded with slaves. At that time, Europeans saw no shame in capturing and selling people. They hunted humans openly, sometimes using dogs to track them down, and believed that God blessed their slave-taking efforts. A chronicle from the year 1444 recorded a glorious day when they captured 165 men, women, and children. In the year 1445, a significant discovery challenged previous misconceptions. That year, Dinis Diaz sailed farther south than any previous explorer, passing Cape Blanco and reaching the southern edge of the Great Desert, where he found green palm trees and black-skinned people. This place became known as Cape Verde. His journey disproved the long-held belief, supported by Aristotle and other scholars like Ptolemy, that the tropics were uninhabitable due to extreme heat. This theory, widely accepted in the early 15th century, had previously discouraged many explorers from venturing into tropical regions. In the same year, the Portuguese discovered the Senegal River, which had been previously missed by Dinis Diaz. The river was mistakenly thought to be a branch of the Nile. The following year, a major setback occurred on the African coast. Two Portuguese ships ventured too close to shore, trusting the local people too much, and were attacked with poisoned arrows. The wounded sailors managed to return to Lisbon 2 months later but died shortly after, having seen nothing but the open sea. Despite this disaster, other explorers continued to push beyond Cape Verde, fearing the poisoned arrows of the natives more than any dangers of the sea. Around this time, the Portuguese began colonizing the Azores. These islands were so untouched by humans that birds could easily be caught by hand. Prince Henry, known as the Navigator, granted the islands to the explorers as a permanent inheritance. In the latter half of the 15th century, during the reign of King Alfonso V, records of Portuguese exploration became scarce. However, it is known that explorers advanced along the rivers of West Africa, particularly the Gambia River, where they traded with caravans from the Sudan. This period marked the beginning of European trade with the rich resources of Central Africa. Prince Henry died on the 13th day of the month of November in the year 1460, and exploration efforts slowed. Despite not taking part in the expeditions himself, he was honored with the title the Navigator for his support of these voyages. Before his time, Portuguese sailors had turned back from Cape Bojador out of fear, but under his encouragement, they became bold explorers. During his life, many discoveries were made. However, after his death, King Alfonso V neglected further exploration, focusing instead on the wealth already being generated. Profits from sugar plantations in Madeira, trading slaves for horses, and resources like gold dust, musk, ivory, and ginger from the coast kept him satisfied. Despite setbacks, explorers continued to push farther south. Before the end of the 15th century, they discovered the Zaire River, now known as the Congo. King John II, like Prince Henry, had a keen interest in sea voyages and scientific exploration. In the year 1486, he sponsored Bartholomew Diaz, who left Lisbon with two small ships and a supply boat, sailing south past the Congo. Contrary winds forced Diaz out to sea, and after being battered by storms, he eventually found land on his left. He had unknowingly rounded the southern tip of Africa. Turning north along the coast, his sailors refused to go any further and demanded to return home. Unable to persuade them, Diaz began the voyage back, passing the cape he had named Cape of Storms. King John later renamed it the Cape of Good Hope. Diaz returned to Lisbon in the month of December in the year 1487, after a journey lasting 16 months and 17 days. Despite his remarkable discovery, Diaz was not rewarded with another command, and instead served as a captain under Pedro Alvarez Cabral, the discoverer of Brazil. Tragically, Diaz drowned on the 23rd day of the month of May in the year 1500 while rounding the Cape of Good Hope during a violent storm. Before Bartholomew Diaz discovered the Cape of Good Hope, an Italian explorer named Cristoforo Colombo arrived at the court of King John II of Portugal. Later, when he moved to Spain, he was called Colon, but today he is best known by his Latin name, Columbus. He was born in the city of Genoa in the year 1456. His father, Domenico, was a wool comber and had 4 children, 3 sons, Cristoforo, Bartolomeo, and Giacomo, also known as Diego, and a daughter, who married an Italian innkeeper. From a young age, Columbus had a deep love for the sea. He showed promise as a skilled sailor and was known for being active, courageous, and uninterested in luxury or laziness. His ambition was to gain knowledge and use it to serve others. He learned Latin, the language of scientific books at the time, and studied subjects like geography, geometry, astronomy, and drawing at the University of Pavia. By the age of 14, he was already qualified to become a ship captain. Columbus first gained experience sailing in the Mediterranean Sea, but he soon found it too limited for his adventurous spirit. During a voyage to the Northern Ocean, he reached Iceland and learned valuable skills. Later he joined a relative, a sea captain, who led expeditions against Venetian and Turkish ships. On one of these expeditions, Columbus nearly lost his life. During a fierce battle, his ship caught fire. In a desperate situation, he remained calm, jumped into the sea, grabbed a floating oar, and swam 2 miles to the Portuguese coast. After resting, he made his way to Lisbon. This event changed his life. In Lisbon, he made friends with other sailors and discussed plans to find a sea route to the East Indies. His ambitions grew further when he married Filipa Perestrelli, the daughter of a sea captain and the first governor of Porto Santo. Through this marriage, he gained access to his father-in-law's diaries and charts. Studying these documents fueled his desire to sail the newly discovered islands. He went back to sea, visited Madeira, and carried out a successful trading business, exploring the Canaries, the African coast, and the Azores along the way.
Hello. If you enjoyed our audiobook, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I need your support to bring more audiobooks to you. Thank you in advance for your support.
Chapter 2: The Long Road to the Indies. Columbus's Preparations. While Columbus was making short voyages from the Canary Islands, he continued to work on the ambitious plan he had developed in Lisbon. Columbus often thought,
"There must be a shorter sea route to the Indies than the one the Portuguese are trying. If you sail west from here, you should eventually reach a land that is either India or somewhere nearby. Is not the earth round? And if it is round, would there not be lands on the other side where people and other creatures live? Is it possible that the entire hemisphere is just the ocean? No. India must be much larger than people think, stretching far towards Europe. So, if you sail directly west, you will eventually get there.
Columbus had other reasons to support his theory. A Portuguese navigator once sailed far to the west and found intricately carved sticks floating in the water coming from that direction. This convinced Columbus that there had to be inhabited land to the west. His father-in-law had also found similar sticks on one of his voyages, carried by the west winds. Additionally, on the western shores of the Azores, they found trees of an unfamiliar type, as well as the bodies of two men with broad faces who were neither European nor of known Asian or African origin. Columbus collected all these clues and studied them thoroughly, comparing them with information he found in both ancient and contemporary sources. This strengthened his belief that his theory was correct. However, he knew that it is natural for human beings to make mistakes, so he decided to seek advice from someone he deeply respected. This was Toscanelli, a learned Florentine physician born in the year 1397. Although he was very old by this time, Toscanelli had previously told King Alfonso V that a voyage across the Atlantic to the East Indies was entirely possible, even sending a chart to Lisbon with the suggested distance and routes. He supported Columbus's plan and urged him to act on it as soon as possible. Now fully committed to his plan, Columbus needed help to make it happen. He realized that he would need support from the government. He first turned to his homeland, Genoa, hoping it would share in the glory of his discoveries. He presented his plan to the Genoese council, asking for their backing. However, they dismissed him, seeing him as inexperienced and unimportant. Though discouraged, Columbus felt he had fulfilled his duty to his homeland. He then traveled to Lisbon to present his plan to the Portuguese court, which was more open to exploration than any other government at the time. Columbus met with King John II and his council, who initially showed interest. However, his plan was soon stolen. The Portuguese secretly outfitted a ship, placed another captain in charge, and sent it on Columbus's proposed route. Lacking Columbus's skill and courage, the captain gave up after a short journey west and returned to Lisbon. Outraged by this betrayal, Columbus left Portugal with his son Diego and went to Madrid. As his wife had died some time before this, he never returned to Lisbon. Uncertain if the Spanish court would support his plan, Columbus sent his brother, Bartolomeo, to England to see if they might be willing to help. In the year 1484, Spain was ruled by King Ferdinand of Aragon. He was known for his cautious and suspicious nature, so he was not easily convinced by uncertain schemes. His wife, Queen Isabella of Castile, was more daring but relied heavily on Ferdinand's judgment and would not support anything he disapproved of. At that time, Ferdinand was also involved in a war with the Moors in Granada, which made it unlikely that Columbus could expect much support. Despite these challenges, Columbus eventually managed to present his plans to Ferdinand and Isabella. They listened to him carefully, but before making a decision, Ferdinand decided to consult his advisors. Unfortunately, these advisors lacked the knowledge to evaluate Columbus's proposal properly and raised foolish objections. One claimed that the ocean between Europe and the Indies was so vast that even a favorable voyage would take at least 3 years. Another argued that, due to the Earth's round shape, sailing west would mean going downhill, and returning would be impossible no matter the wind conditions. Some even mocked Columbus, asking why he thought he was the only wise person in the world, and why, if land existed on the other side of the ocean, it had remained undiscovered for so long. Columbus needed immense patience to handle such ignorance and arrogance. He calmly and seriously addressed each objection, but his efforts were in vain. After 5 years of trying to convince these and other skeptics, he was frustrated to learn that the king had sided with them. The official response was that, as long as the war with the Moors continued, the king could not consider any other ventures. Although disappointed and having wasted valuable time, Columbus refused to give up. He approached 2 Spanish dukes who were wealthy enough to finance a small exploration fleet. However, they lacked the belief and courage to support a project that was too costly, even for the king. Again, Columbus was let down, but he kept his feelings to himself. Deciding not to waste any more time on fruitless attempts, he prepared to leave Spain in the year 1491 and seek support from the King of France, who had sent him an encouraging letter while he was still at the Spanish court. Columbus set out for France with his son Diego. On their journey, they stopped at the bustling seaport of Palos. There, he knocked on the door of a Franciscan monastery and asked the doorkeeper for some bread and water for his tired son. Brother Juan Perez de Marchena, the guardian of the monastery and the queen's confessor, noticed them. He struck up a conversation with Columbus, who engagingly shared his plans and hardships. Brother Juan listened attentively, found Columbus's plan reasonable, and urged him to stay while he wrote to the queen for support. Columbus agreed to stay. Brother Juan wrote a convincing letter to Queen Isabella, outlining why Columbus's plan was feasible. This changed Isabella's mind, and she quickly wrote back, urging Columbus to return to the court. Encouraged once more, Columbus obeyed the queen's request. She welcomed him warmly and expressed hope that his plan would succeed. However, the hesitant King Ferdinand disrupted everything. He called the same advisors who had previously dismissed Columbus's idea. They gave the same negative report, so Ferdinand refused to support the voyage and ordered Isabella to break off contact with Columbus. Despite this setback, Columbus's determination remained strong. He started preparing to leave for England, hoping to present his plan to the English king, since 3 other governments had already rejected it. Just as he was about to leave, news arrived that the Moors had been defeated, ending their rule in Spain. Overjoyed by their victory, Ferdinand and Isabella now ruled all of Spain. 2 of Columbus's friends seized this moment to persuade the queen, arguing that his plan would greatly expand royal authority. Their enthusiasm finally convinced both Ferdinand and Isabella to stop opposing the plan. A messenger was sent to bring Columbus back to the court, where Queen Isabella eagerly awaited him. Putting aside all his past disappointments, Columbus proposed his terms. When they were finally accepted, he felt that his dreams were coming true. He requested to be made a noble, given the rank of admiral, granted the authority of viceroy over all the lands he discovered, and promised 1/10 of all trade and conquest profits for himself and his heirs. The king was understandably reluctant to agree, as the new lands could be larger than Spain itself, making Columbus potentially more powerful than the king. However, Isabella was firmly committed to supporting Columbus and dismissed all objections. Isabella declared,
"I will pledge my crown of Castile to ensure the success of this ambitious expedition, and, if our treasury falls short, I shall not hesitate to offer my jewels to fund this venture. The potential rewards far outweigh any temporary financial sacrifice we might endure."
Columbus was overjoyed when his efforts finally paid off. He quickly began preparing the ships for the journey. The vessels provided by the king were small and poorly built, so fragile that no one but Columbus would have risked sailing them across an unknown, vast ocean with uncharted dangers. Columbus commanded the largest ship, the Santa Maria, while the second ship was named the Pinta, and the third, the Nina. The Pinta and Nina were barely bigger than large boats. The small fleet was stocked with supplies for 12 months and had a crew of 90 men. The entire expedition cost only 5,300 ducats, a sum that seemed so large to the financially strained court that the plan might have been abandoned if not for the citizens of Palos, who provided 2 of the ships. The king contributed just 1. Finally, the ships were ready and anchored, prepared to set sail. Before departing, Columbus felt it was his duty to seek the Creator's blessing for the journey, as one of his goals was to spread knowledge of the true God to the uncharted lands he hoped to find. Along with his crew, Columbus solemnly marched to a nearby monastery in Palos, where they prayed for divine guidance. Afterward, they returned with renewed confidence. On the morning of the 3rd day of the month of August, in the year 1492, the fleet set sail in the name of God, cheered on by a large crowd. Columbus captained the Santa Maria, while the 2 smaller ships were commanded by brothers Martin and Vicente Pinzon. Columbus planned to sail first to the Canary Islands. However, on the 2nd day, a small mishap occurred that could have ended the expedition if Columbus had been as superstitious as his crew. The Pinta's rudder broke, likely the result of sabotage by the helmsman, who feared the voyage and hoped this would force Columbus to turn back. The crew panicked, believing this incident was a bad omen. The sailors said,
"We must turn back now, Admiral. The sea is treacherous and unforgiving. This broken rudder is surely a sign from the heavens, warning us of the perils that lie ahead. If we continue on this foolhardy journey, we will be lost to the depths of the ocean, never to be seen again. Our families will mourn us, and our names will be forever associated with this ill-fated expedition. Please, for the sake of our lives and the honor of our nation, let us return to the safety of our shores."
Columbus asked,
But why do you believe this? I am interested in understanding your perspective on this matter. What makes you so certain that a simple mechanical issue is a divine warning against our voyage?
The sailors replied.
"Admiral, is it not clear? The heavens have spoken to us through this broken rudder, a harbinger of the calamities that surely await us should we persist on this perilous journey. The very forces of nature conspire against our expedition, warning us with this omen that disaster lies ahead if we dare to continue. How can we ignore such a clear sign from above? It would be foolish and reckless to disregard this divine message and sail onward into certain doom."
Columbus responded calmly.
Your concern is understandable, but I respectfully disagree with your interpretation. In my experience, a broken rudder is merely a mechanical issue that requires our attention and repair. It is not uncommon for ships to encounter such problems, especially at the beginning of a long journey. Rather than seeing this as a divine warning, I view it as an opportunity for us to demonstrate our resourcefulness and problem-solving skills. Let us focus on fixing the rudder and continuing our mission. Remember, gentlemen, great discoveries are often made by those who persevere in the face of challenges. This minor setback should not deter us from our grand purpose.
The sailors whispered among themselves.
The Admiral seems to have a different perspective on these matters. He interprets events through the lens of reason and experience, rather than seeing them as supernatural omens. Perhaps his approach is what makes him uniquely suited for this unprecedented voyage.
Columbus, aware of his crew's fears, knew he had to address their superstitions before they spiraled out of control. He calmly explained that it was unreasonable to see every mishap as a sign of disaster, as God had never promised to reveal the future through signs. He reminded them that heaven had wisely kept the future hidden from us. Expecting misfortune from every little sign was both useless and foolish. Columbus said,
The best thing a wise and faithful person can do is to fulfill their duties every day, trust in divine guidance, and not fear what lies ahead.
Although Columbus could not entirely dispel their superstitions, his words eased their fears enough to make them manageable. With the situation under control, they anchored at the Canary Islands to make the necessary repairs. On the 6th day of the month of September, they set sail again, embarking on their great journey across the uncharted Western Sea. On the first day, they made little progress due to calm winds. By the second, or some say the third day, the Canary Islands had disappeared from view. As soon as land was out of sight, the crew's courage faltered. They cried out in fear, beating their chests as though facing certain doom. But Columbus remained steadfast, unshaken by their cries. His calm and confident demeanor shamed them into regaining some courage. He explained the honor and rewards awaiting them at the journey's end, inspiring them with his words. The crew, moved by his leadership, promised to follow him wherever he led. Throughout the voyage, Columbus spent most of his time on deck, using the plummet and other navigational tools to keep the ship on course. The plummet, a heavy lead weight on a long rope, was used to measure the water's depth and avoid running aground. Columbus also used an astrolabe to determine the ship's location by observing the stars. Although modern sailors have far more advanced tools, these instruments were essential in his time. Columbus personally handled all measurements and observations, giving himself only a few hours of sleep each day. His calm focus and expertise reassured even the most fearful sailors. This journey was only possible under a leader like Columbus. In the hands of someone with less courage, foresight, and skill, it would have surely failed. Chapter 3. Columbus's Gamble, Trusting the Unknown. On the second day after leaving the Canary Islands, the fleet made only 18 miles due to light winds. Columbus knew that the length of the voyage could intimidate his inexperienced crew, so he decided to play a harmless trick. He kept 2 sets of records, one for himself and a shorter one for the crew. He told them they had sailed only 15 miles westward, giving them a false sense of progress. By the 12th day of the month of September, 6 days after their departure, they had sailed 150 miles west of the Canary Island of Faro. That day, they spotted the trunk of a large tree drifting in the water, which seemed to have been floating for a long time. The sailors took this as a sign that land was nearby and felt encouraged, but the optimism was short-lived. After traveling another 15 miles, something strange happened. The compass needle, which had always pointed to the North Star, shifted 1 degree to the west. This phenomenon was unfamiliar to Columbus and his crew. The sailors panicked, thinking the world was somehow out of joint since the compass no longer pointed north. To them, the journey already felt endless, despite Columbus insisting they were on track. Now, with the compass seemingly malfunctioning, all hope seemed lost. Columbus, ever resourceful, quickly came up with an explanation to calm his crew, even though it did not fully satisfy him. Using a clever trick, he adjusted the compass to point correctly again, easing their fears. No sooner had they recovered from this scare than a new worry arose. They had entered the region of the trade winds, which were unknown at the time. The sailors feared that if these winds continued to blow, they might never be able to sail back home. As if this was not enough, on the 16th day of the month of September, they encountered another troubling sight. The ocean was covered with thick green seaweed as far as they could see. In some areas, it was so dense that it felt like sailing through a giant meadow. The crew became terrified, thinking they had reached the end of the navigable ocean and that reefs or shallows under the seaweed would wreck their ships. They murmured among themselves,
Why should we continue to follow this impetuous and rash leader. His decisions seem to be putting our lives at risk with each passing day. We have ventured far beyond the known world, and now even the compass, our most reliable tool for navigation, appears to be failing us. How can we trust someone who seems to be leading us into certain doom?
Columbus once again stepped in to calm their fears. Columbus asked,
Why are we allowing ourselves to be consumed by fear? Consider this seaweed as a promising sign of our progress. Does its presence not indicate that we are drawing nearer to land? After all, vegetation typically flourishes near shorelines. This abundance of seaweed suggests we are approaching its point of origin. Instead of seeing it as a threat, we should view it as nature's way of guiding us towards our destination. Remember, gentlemen, every challenge we face brings us one step closer to our goal. Let us embrace this as a positive development in our journey.
His words gave them hope, especially when birds were spotted flying westward. Fear turned into anticipation, and they sailed on, now filled with the excitement of finally reaching their goal. The hope sparked by the seaweed and the sight of birds quickly faded for the sailors. They had now traveled 770 miles west, yet no land was in sight. Thankfully, only Columbus knew how to calculate the true distance. He continued to hide some of the miles and reported that they had sailed 550 miles instead. Even this shorter distance felt much too far from home for the crew. They began to complain again, regretting that they had trusted Columbus's empty promises. Some blamed Queen Isabella for allowing them to risk their lives on such a reckless mission. They decided that now was the time to turn back, especially if the constant east wind did not stop them. The boldest among them even suggested throwing Columbus overboard to get rid of their dangerous leader. They reassured each other that, once back in Spain, they would be justified in explaining the death of a man who had gambled with so many lives. Columbus sensed the danger, but stayed calm. Fully aware of the importance of his mission and trusting in divine protection, he appeared before his crew with an air of confidence. He gently scolded them for their behavior and used every trick he knew to restore their hope and courage. Sometimes he appealed to their sense of duty with kind and encouraging words. Other times, he asserted his authority, warning them of the Queen's displeasure and severe punishment if they tried to turn back when they were so close to a great success. Great leaders have a way of inspiring those around them, and Columbus managed to calm his crew. Then, nature itself helped his cause. The wind, which had been blowing persistently from the east, shifted to the southwest. This meant that returning home was now impossible, even if they wanted to. Columbus pointed this out, and soon, new signs of land brought fresh hope. They sailed on with renewed determination. On the 25th day of the month of September, Martin Alonso Pinzon, the commander of the Pinta, which was sailing ahead, came alongside Columbus's ship. He excitedly reported that he believed the land was just 15 miles to the north. At the word land, excitement spread among the crew. They sang praises to God and urged Columbus to change course to the north. However, Columbus wasn't convinced and refused to alter his plan, insisting on continuing westward. His judgment proved to be correct. The next day they saw many birds, which suggested that land was nearby, as birds usually do not fly far from shore. However, when they measured the sea's depth, it was 200 fathoms deep, which contradicted Columbus's belief that they were nearing land since the sea should become shallower, closer to shore. That evening, singing birds landed on the masts and stayed all night, flying westward at dawn. Shortly after, they witnessed an unusual sight: a school of flying fish gliding over the water. Some even landed on the deck, fascinating the sailors with their long, wing-like fins. On the same day, they saw more seaweed, another hopeful sign that the land was close. Despite these positive signs, the days passed without sighting land, and frustration grew. As their hopes rose and fell, restlessness turned into open mutiny on all three ships. Even the officers sided with the crews against Columbus. Surrounded by threats and abandoned by everyone, Columbus stood firm amidst the chaos of his angry crew, like a lone oak in a storm. Calm and resolute, he faced the fury of the mutineers who demanded either his death or, even worse, in his eyes, the abandonment of their mission. Once again, he tried every method to calm them, but it was no use. They cursed him and threatened to kill him if he did not turn back to Spain immediately. Realizing he had no choice, Columbus decided to compromise. He promised that if they followed his orders for just 3 more days and still found no land, he would take them back home. Despite their anger, the crew recognized the fairness of this offer and agreed. Columbus, however, was certain he would succeed. The signs of land were too strong to ignore. For several days, the depth of the water had been steadily decreasing, and the type of earth they pulled up from the seafloor indicated nearby land. Flocks of birds, which could not fly long distances, headed west. They saw branches floating with fresh red berries. The air grew milder, and the wind patterns became more changeable, especially at night. Confident in their success, Columbus reminded the crew to thank God for their protection on this dangerous voyage. He ordered them to slow down, not wanting to make landfall in the dark. He also reminded them of the Queen's promise of a reward of 10,000 maravedis for the first person to spot land and promised to match that amount himself. That night, the crew stayed on deck, anxiously scanning the horizon. 2 hours before midnight, Columbus, standing on the quarterdeck, thought he saw a light in the distance. He called over a royal page and another crew member to confirm. All three saw the light moving from place to place, suggesting it was being carried by someone. Overjoyed at this sign that their journey was nearly over, Columbus stayed awake the rest of the night. Around 2 hours after midnight on Friday, the 12th day of the month of October, a loud shout came from the Pinta, which was sailing ahead. Land! Land! Joy filled every heart. Between hope and fear, they waited for dawn to prove it was not just a dream. Every minute felt like an hour, every hour like a day. Finally, the eastern sky began to brighten. As the sun rose in its full glory, the crew of the Pinta sang out, "Lord God, we praise thee." The crews of the other ships joined in the joyous celebration as they finally saw the long-awaited land before them. As soon as their song of gratitude ended, the crew remembered their duty to their commander. With full hearts and tears in their eyes, they knelt at his feet and begged for his forgiveness. Though Columbus had shown remarkable strength when facing their anger, his calmness was even more impressive now as he forgave them and promised to forget their actions. Columbus first landed on one of the islands in what we now call the Bahamas. This island was known as Guanahani, which Columbus named San Salvador, meaning the Island of Deliverance, although it is no longer known by that name. The sailors stood in awe, taking in the sight of a new world they had never seen before, now lit up by the rising sun. They gazed at the lush land, filled with beautiful forests and winding streams. Columbus ordered the boats to be lowered, and with banners flying and martial music playing, he and his crew rowed ashore, followed by his leaders and a small armed force. As they approached the shore, they noticed a large group of natives watching the strange European ships with curiosity. Columbus, dressed in fine clothes and holding a drawn sword, was the first to step onto the soil of the New World. His companions knelt, kissed the ground, and pledged their loyalty to him, now the viceroy of the newly discovered land. They then set up a crucifix on the shore, knelt before it, and gave thanks to God for their safe journey. Following this, they formally took possession of the land in the name of the King and Queen of Spain. While these ceremonies took place, the native people crowded around, watching in silent amazement. They looked at the ships and the newcomers, unable to understand what was happening. They saw the ceremonies but had no idea what they meant. If they had known what lay ahead, they might have cried out in sorrow or even tried to defend themselves against the strangers they now admired with awe. Everything they saw, the pale skin, beards, clothing, weapons, and actions of the Europeans, was beyond their understanding. When they heard the cannon and musket fire, they huddled together as if seeking shelter from a storm. They thought these strangers, armed with thunder and lightning, were not human but divine beings, possibly children of their sun god. Some of them believed the sun was the all-powerful god, while others believed in multiple deities with human forms. Some had no beliefs at all about the world's origins. They had no concept of a single god and lived in ignorance of their own origins or fate. The Spaniards were just as amazed by what they saw. The plants, trees, and shrubs were unlike anything they knew from Europe. The natives appeared to be a completely different race, with their dark, copper-colored skin, black hair, beardless chins, and medium stature. Their features were unfamiliar, their manner gentle, and their bodies were marked and painted in strange ways. Some wore little to no clothing, adorning themselves with feathers, shells, and gold ornaments in their ears, noses, and on their heads. Initially, the natives were afraid, but when the Spaniards offered them beads, ribbons, and other small gifts, they began to trust these heavenly visitors. By evening, as the Spaniards returned to their ships, many of the natives followed in small canoes carved from tree trunks, either out of curiosity or to exchange gifts. They gave the Spaniards cotton yarn, which they expertly made, arrows tipped with fish bones, fruits, and various parrots. The natives were so eager to get European trinkets that they collected broken bits lying on the deck and traded up to 25 pounds of cotton yarn for a couple of copper coins, which had no real use to them. To them, these items, simply because they belonged to the Europeans, had great value. The next day, Columbus went ashore again, followed everywhere by the natives. He was particularly eager to find out where the gold came from. They told him it was not on their island but farther to the south. Wanting to keep his promise to the King of Spain and the court to bring them wealth, Columbus decided to act on this information. He returned to his ship, took 7 natives along as guides, and sailed south. On his journey, he saw several new islands but only visited the 3 largest, which he named Santa Maria del Concepcion, Ferdinand, and Isabella. However, he found no gold there. Everyone he asked insisted it was located farther south, so he quickly set sail again. After a relatively short voyage, he spotted a land that looked different from any he had seen so far. This place was not flat like the other islands. It had mountains, valleys, forests, streams, and rivers. Unsure if it was part of the mainland or just a large island, he anchored near the mouth of a large river to get a closer look. The land was called Cuba by the locals. At the sight of the ships, the people fled to the mountains, leaving their homes empty. Only one person dared to row out to Columbus's ship in a small canoe. Columbus gained his trust with small gifts, and then sent 2 Spaniards and one of the natives from Guanahani to explore the area and try to make contact, hoping to avoid scaring the locals every time they saw his ships. The 2 Spaniards traveled about 12 miles inland and returned with the following report.
We found much of the land cultivated and very fertile. They grow corn, maize, and a root that when baked tastes like bread. Eventually, we reached a village of about 50 wooden houses and around 1,000 people. The village leaders came out to meet us. When they learned that we had natives on board and who we were, they embraced us and led us to their largest house. We sat on chairs shaped like animals, with tails forming the backrests and eyes and ears made of gold. The villagers sat near us on the floor, kissed our hands and feet, and treated us with such respect that it was clear they thought we were supernatural beings. They offered us the baked root, which tasted similar to chestnuts. All who served us were men. After a while, they left, and several women entered, showing the same respect as the men. When we were ready to return, many of the villagers wanted to come with us, but we declined, bringing only the village leader and his son as a gesture of honor.
Columbus thanked them and hosted the village leader and his son on board his ship. When he asked about the location of the gold, they pointed east. However, they could not understand why the white men were so eager to find a metal that, to them, was useful only as decoration. Columbus and his men were equally surprised by the simplicity of the locals. Eager to explore further, Columbus cut his stay short and prepared to sail to the east, to a place the natives called Haiti, in search of the much-desired gold. Columbus left Cuba on the 19th day of the month of November, taking 12 natives with him, intending to bring them to Spain. The natives left their homeland without much hesitation, since Columbus had done his best to make their situation comfortable. However, with unfavorable winds slowing down Columbus's large ship, Alonso Pinzon, the captain of the Pinta and the fastest of the ships, decided to sneak away. He planned to reach the gold-rich land first and fill his sacks before anyone else. Despite Columbus signaling him to wait, Pinzon ignored the orders and sailed off, driven by his greed for gold. Columbus had no choice but to accept what he could not change. Soon, a storm made it too dangerous to continue at sea, so he returned to Cuba and anchored in a safe harbor. While waiting for the weather to improve, he took the opportunity to observe the land and its people more closely. He noticed a unique aspect of their eating habits that initially disgusted the Spaniards. They enjoyed eating large spiders, worms found in rotting wood, and half-cooked fish. Some Spaniards tried to eat these things, but quickly gave up. When the weather improved, Columbus set out again to find Haiti and locate the Pinta and his unfaithful companion Pinzon. After sailing just 16 miles, he reached Haiti on the 6th day of the month of December and named the island Hispaniola, or Little Spain. On his arrival, the local inhabitants fled into the woods, and there was no sign of the Pinta. Columbus soon left the harbor and began exploring the northern coast. He soon found another harbor where he finally made contact with the local people. In appearance and lifestyle, they were similar to the natives of Guanahani and Cuba. They were copper-skinned, unclothed, simple, and gentle. Like the others, they also believed the Spaniards were not humans, but celestial beings. These people wore more gold ornaments than those Columbus had met before, yet they valued gold so little that they were willing to trade it for beads, pins, bells, and other small trinkets. When Columbus asked where the gold came from, they pointed to the east. Once again, he set sail, hoping to find the source of the treasure he had been seeking. Chapter 4. Unexpected Allies, the Natives of Hispaniola. While the ships were anchored off the coast of Hispaniola, the local chief, or cacique, heard about the arrival of the strange white men and decided to visit Columbus. The cacique arrived with an impressive entourage, carried in a litter by 4 men. Like his people, he wore very little clothing. Without hesitation, the cacique boarded the ship and entered the cabin where Columbus was seated at the table. Accompanied by 2 elderly men, who seemed to be his advisors, he sat down respectfully next to Columbus, while the 2 older men sat at his feet. Columbus offered him food and wine, which he tasted before sending the leftovers to his people on the deck. After the meal, the cacique gave Columbus some gold ornaments and a finely crafted belt. In return, Columbus gave him a string of amber beads, a pair of red slippers, a rug, and a flask of orange flower water. The cacique was so pleased that he told Columbus everything in his land was at his disposal. The cacique was dignified with his people, but with the Spaniards he was friendly and curious. He carefully observed everything around him, expressing admiration for what he saw. In the evening, he requested to return to shore. Columbus agreed, and as a gesture of respect, he fired the ship's cannons in salute. The cacique was so impressed that he declared the Spaniards must be of divine origin since they could control thunder and lightning. His people were in such awe that they kissed the footprints left by the Spaniards. However, since the cacique's land did not have the gold mines Columbus was searching for, he set sail again, heading further east. According to the information Columbus had gathered, the gold was in a mountainous region ruled by a powerful chief. He hurried toward this new destination. However, had he known what disaster awaited him on this short voyage, he might have given up the search for gold altogether. While sailing, they reached a cape where the sea was so calm that they could have easily anchored close to shore. Columbus had not slept for 2 days, and finally, exhaustion took over. Handing the tiller to the helmsman, he warned him to be careful and went below deck to rest. As soon as Columbus fell asleep, the sailors also abandoned their posts, believing there was no danger. Even the helmsman, ignoring Columbus's orders, left his duties to an inexperienced cabin boy and went to sleep. With the boy as the only one awake, the ship was caught in a strong current and drifted toward the shore. A sudden jolt knocked the tiller out of the boy's hands. The ship struck rocks, waking everyone. Columbus rushed to the deck, quickly realizing the ship had run aground. Amid the chaos, he remained calm and gave orders to try and save the vessel. He told the crew to drop anchor some distance away to pull the ship off the rocks. However, the terrified crew ignored his commands, thinking only of their safety. They rowed to the Nina, leaving Columbus and the others behind. Nina's commander refused to take on the crew who had abandoned their duty. Meanwhile, Columbus cut down the masts and threw unnecessary items overboard in an attempt to lighten the ship. However, the hull had split, and water flooded in too quickly. In the end, Columbus and his remaining crew had no choice but to abandon the ship and row to the Nina. The next morning, Columbus sent a message to the local chief, Guacanahari, informing him of the shipwreck and asking for his people's help in saving the valuables on board. Deeply saddened by the news, Guacanahari wept and immediately came to the Europeans' aid, bringing many of his people with him. These generous natives did not try to steal anything. Instead, they worked hard to save as much as possible. They gathered several canoes and with their combined efforts managed to bring all the important items ashore. Guacanahari personally took charge of the valuables, regularly sending one of his relatives to reassure Columbus not to worry. He promised that, if needed, he would give Columbus everything he had. The chief took the salvaged goods to his house and posted a strong guard to watch over them, although it seemed unnecessary. The natives were genuinely upset by the disaster, feeling as if it had happened to them. In his report to the Spanish court, Columbus spoke highly of these noble people. Columbus wrote,
"In truth, Your Majesty, these people are so gentle and peaceful. I can confidently say that there are no better people in the world. They love their neighbors as themselves. They are always pleasant, kind, and cheerful, and they speak with a smile. Although they go naked, they are modest and exemplary in their habits. Their king is treated with great respect, and he is so noble and generous that it is a true pleasure to have known him. He and his people will always remain in my fondest memories."
When Guacanahari learned how much the Europeans valued gold, He gave them many gold items to comfort them after their misfortune. He even promised to obtain more from a place he called Cibao. Many of his people also brought gold and eagerly traded it for European trinkets. One native, holding a large piece of gold in one hand, extended the other to a Spaniard, who placed a bell in it. The native dropped the gold and ran away, thinking he had tricked the Europeans and would be seen as a thief. The Spaniards began to enjoy their time on the island, but Columbus was filled with worry day and night. His best ship was lost, and the unfaithful Pinzon had abandoned him. The only vessel left was too small and poorly built to carry all his men, and was not reliable enough for the long journey back to Spain. Columbus eventually decided to take a few men and attempt the return voyage, despite the risks, so he could bring news of his discovery to the court. He would leave the rest of his men behind as colonists in Hispaniola. Everyone approved of this plan, and enough volunteers stepped forward to stay behind. The local chief, Guacanahari, was thrilled when he heard that some of these heavenly visitors would remain to protect him and his people from their enemies. According to Guacanahari, a fierce and warlike tribe called the Caribs lived on islands to the southeast. From time to time, they would invade his land, forcing his people, who were too weak to fight back, to flee to the mountains. Columbus promised to protect them and, to show his power, ordered his men to perform some military drills in front of the natives. The locals were astonished, but when they saw the cannons from the wrecked ship fired, they were so terrified that they dropped to the ground and covered their faces. Even Guacanahari was alarmed until Columbus reassured him that the thunder would be used solely against their enemies. To demonstrate, Columbus aimed a cannon at the wrecked ship and fired. The cannonball passed through the ship and splashed into the water on the other side. The sight left the chief in awe, convinced that these visitors truly controlled thunder and lightning. Over the next few days, the Spaniards built a small fort with the help of the friendly natives, who had no idea they were creating the chains that would one day bind them. Whenever Columbus was on shore, Guacanahari showered him with gifts, which Columbus generously returned. On one occasion, the chief greeted Columbus wearing a golden crown and led him to a beautifully decorated house. There, he took off the crown and, with great respect, placed it on Columbus's head. In return, Columbus removed a necklace of small pearls he was wearing and put it around the chief's neck. He then took off his fine cloak and draped it over the chief's shoulders, placed a silver ring on his finger, and gave him a pair of red boots. Through this exchange of gifts, a bond of friendship was formed between them. The fort was completed in 10 days, and Columbus chose 43 men to stay behind as its garrison, led by the nobleman Diego de Serrana. He instructed them to obey Serrana completely, to maintain the goodwill of Guacanahari and his people, and to learn the local language. He named the settlement La Navidad. After setting up the fort, Columbus boarded the small ship and set sail on the 4th day of the month of January in the year 1493. It was a bold decision, crossing the vast and still largely unknown ocean in a vessel that was not built for long journeys. To prove the truth of his discoveries to the doubtful Spanish court, Columbus brought back not only gold, but also several natives and various species of unknown birds. As he sailed eastward, Columbus kept close to the coast of Hispaniola to explore the surrounding region. On the 2nd day, he spotted a ship in the distance. He changed course to investigate and discovered that it was the Pinta, commanded by the unfaithful Pinzon, whom he had not seen for 6 weeks. Pinzon boarded Columbus's ship, claiming that he had been separated by stormy weather. Although Columbus knew this was a lie, he graciously pretended to believe him and welcomed him back. Columbus was relieved that the success of his discoveries no longer depended on the safety of just one small ship. Pinzon had been sailing along the Hispaniola coast in a different direction, trading for gold. A strong west wind pushed the ship swiftly forward, and the excited crews began to imagine themselves back in Spain, sharing tales of the wonders they had seen in the New World. But suddenly, a storm cloud appeared in the western sky. The storm approached quickly, and the sky grew darker. The sailors stood nervously on deck, anxiously watching the admiral as he calmly gave the necessary orders. Waves began to rise on the open ocean, tossing the ships around. The rigging rattled, and the wind howled through the ropes. Lightning flashed, followed by darkness. Thunder roared, and heavy rain pounded the ships. The storm hit with full force. Lightning, crashing thunder, fierce winds, and massive waves that lifted the ships high and then plunged them into deep troughs. Overcome with fear, some sailors fell to their knees, praying with uplifted hands for their lives. Others lay paralyzed with terror, more dead than alive. Some clung to superstitions, promising to make a barefoot pilgrimage to a church dedicated to the Virgin if they survived. They were truly in a desperate situation, caught between life and death. Each towering wave felt like a messenger of doom. Despite all of Columbus's skill and experience, every effort he made to keep them safe was in vain. He tried to encourage the crew, urging them to take action, but they were frozen with fear, incapable of doing anything as the storm raged on. Finally, realizing that human efforts were no longer enough, Columbus retreated to his cabin. His greatest concern was not his own life, but the possibility that his important discoveries might be lost forever. The thought pierced his heart like a sword. Even with death looming, Columbus was still able to think calmly and make clear decisions. He took a piece of parchment and wrote an account of his discoveries. He wrapped it in oilcloth, sealed it with wax, placed it in a well-protected cask, and threw it into the ocean, hoping it would wash ashore somewhere. Later, he prepared a second package and secured it to the stern of the ship so that if the ship sank, it might still be found. As if things were not bad enough, the darkest and most terrifying of nights descended, adding to the crew's fear of imminent death. No stars shone in the sky to offer hope. Both sea and sky were cloaked in thick darkness as the hurricane continued to rage. The crew found themselves caught between life and death, barely hanging on. But finally, the dreadful night passed. As dawn broke, the crew's despair turned to joy when they saw land in the distance, the Azores. However, the storm still raged, so Columbus could not approach the shore. Although they desperately wanted to land, they had to wait offshore for 4 days. During this time, the Pinta had vanished. Columbus did not know if it had sunk or if Pinzon had used the storm as an opportunity to sail back to Spain to claim credit for the discoveries. Eventually, the storm calmed, and Columbus anchored near the shore. Some Portuguese approached the ship, offering food for sale and asking where they had come from and where they were headed. Learning there was a chapel dedicated to the Virgin nearby, Columbus allowed half of his crew to go ashore to fulfill their vow to make a barefoot pilgrimage. Columbus himself stayed on board, having become lame in both hips from the long, grueling days at sea. He instructed the crew to return quickly so that the other half could go ashore as well. Hours passed, but none of the men returned. As more time went by, Columbus grew increasingly suspicious. By nightfall, with still no sign of them, he feared the worst. He had to wait until morning to find out what had happened. The next day, he discovered that the Portuguese had captured and arrested his men. Furious at this betrayal, Columbus protested, but his words had no effect. Frustrated, He threatened to take 100 Portuguese prisoners and lay waste to the island if his men were not released. This bold declaration had the desired effect. Portuguese messengers came to ask if Columbus was in service of the Spanish court. When he showed them his credentials, they released the prisoners. It was later said that the governor had orders from the Portuguese king to capture Columbus and his crew and then take control of the lands he had discovered. However, since Columbus stayed on board his ship, the governor decided it was better to release the prisoners and pretend they had not known they were Spaniards. Relieved that this ordeal was over, Columbus set sail again, hopeful that the worst was behind him. But fate had one more trial in store. The storm returned, driving the ship off course. The sails were torn, the masts shook, and with every wave the crew feared the ship would break apart. After 2 days of battling the storm, they suddenly saw rocks ahead, toward which the damaged ship was being pushed. Just when it seemed they would be wrecked, Columbus remained calm and made a skillful maneuver at the last moment, steering the ship away from danger and saving everyone on board. Shortly after, Columbus realized they were near the Portuguese coast, likely at the mouth of the Tagus River, so he decided to anchor there. At daybreak, Columbus sent messengers, one to Madrid, to inform the King of Spain of his safe return, and another to the King of Portugal in Lisbon, to request permission to sail up the Tagus River for repairs. Permission was granted, so Columbus immediately set sail for Lisbon. The news of his arrival quickly spread through the city. Soon, the harbor was filled with people eager to catch a glimpse of the man who had accomplished such an extraordinary feat. The shoreline was packed, and boats crowded the river. Some thanked God for guiding the brave navigator, while others lamented that Portugal had missed the opportunity by turning him away. Even the King of Portugal could not ignore Columbus's success, despite his regret that Spain would now gain power and lands that could have belonged to Portugal if not for the poor advice he had received. He ordered his subjects to honor Columbus, provide food for his crew, and sent him a letter warmly inviting him to visit. Columbus accepted the royal invitation, and upon his arrival, the entire court, as commanded by the king, came out to meet him. During their meeting, the king insisted that Columbus sit and keep his head covered while speaking, a mark of great respect. The king showed keen interest in hearing about Columbus's discoveries and tried to persuade him to enter Portuguese service with flattering offers. However, Columbus was steadfast. Even if he had been offered half the kingdom, he would not waver in his loyalty to the Spanish court to which he had dedicated his efforts. After a polite departure and completing the necessary repairs to his ship, Columbus set sail again for Spain, returning to the same port he had left 7 months and 11 days earlier on the 15th day of the month of March. Chapter 5. New Discoveries and the Clash of Cultures. As soon as the news of Columbus's return reached Palos, people rushed to the harbor to see for themselves if it was true. When the ship drew closer and they recognized familiar faces on deck, some seeing their sons, brothers, friends, or husbands, a wave of joy swept over the crowd. Cheers filled the air, and many shed tears of happiness. When Columbus stepped ashore, he was greeted with the sound of cannons, the ringing of church bells, and the cheers of the crowd. Despite this celebration, which might have overwhelmed most people, Columbus remained humble. His first act was to give credit for his success to God. Accompanied by his sailors and the townspeople, he went straight to the church where he had prayed before setting sail. There, he publicly thanked the Almighty for the success of the voyage. Afterward, Columbus set out for Barcelona, where the King and Queen of Spain were holding court. Meanwhile, Pinzon had arrived at a different Spanish port a few days earlier, hoping to be the first to deliver the news to the court. However, the king ordered that he was not to appear before them without Columbus. This disappointment was too much for Pinzon, and he fell ill and died a few days later. On his way to Barcelona, Columbus was greeted by crowds from nearby regions. His name was spoken with admiration everywhere he went. When he finally reached Barcelona, the king and queen eagerly awaited him. The entire royal household came out to honor his arrival. The streets were so packed with people that it was almost impossible for Columbus to pass through. The procession was a grand spectacle. Native people from the New World dressed in their traditional clothing led the way. Behind them, men carried gold plates, gold dust, and gold ornaments that Columbus had brought back. Others followed, carrying samples of products from the new land, including cotton yarn, chests of pepper, parrots perched on long poles, stuffed animals, and many other items that had never been seen in Europe before. Columbus, the center of attention, came last in the procession. To honor Columbus, the king and queen had a grand throne set up in the public square where they waited. As Columbus approached to kneel before them, the king extended his hand for Columbus to kiss and invited him to sit beside them on a chair. Columbus then modestly told the story of his journey and presented the items he had brought back as proof of his discoveries. When he finished, both the king and queen, along with the crowd of spectators, knelt and thanked God for these great discoveries that would bring prosperity to Spain. Following this, all the rewards Columbus had requested were granted. He and his family were given noble status, and whenever the king went out riding, Columbus was given the honor of riding beside him, an honor previously reserved only for princes and royalty. However, what pleased Columbus the most was the royal order to equip an entire fleet for a second expedition. Meanwhile, the king sent an ambassador to Rome, asking the Pope to officially grant Spain ownership of the newly discovered lands, as well as any future discoveries in the ocean. Pope Alexander drew a line on the globe running from pole to pole about 100 miles west of the Azores. He then issued a decree stating that all land discovered beyond this line would belong to Spain. At that time, it was customary for a prince to hold possession of newly discovered territories only if the Pope, as the divine representative on earth, confirmed it. The fleet was prepared quickly, and soon, 17 well-equipped ships were ready to set sail from Cadiz. Many people from all walks of life wanted to join the expedition, hoping for wealth and honor. However, Columbus could only take 1,500 men. He made careful preparations, ensuring the fleet was well provisioned and equipped with everything needed for colonization. Along with tools, they brought animals like horses, mules, and cows, which were not found in the New World. They also carried European grains, seeds, and plants that Columbus believed would thrive in the new environment. Since Columbus still believed that the lands he had discovered were part of India, he called them the West Indies, to distinguish them from the real India in the East. With everything ready, the fleet left Cadiz on the 25th day of the month of September in the year 1493. Columbus first sailed to the Canary Islands, arriving on the 5th day of the month of October. There, they restocked fresh water, wood, and livestock, including some pigs, and set sail again from the island of Faro on the 13th day of the month of October. Favorable winds helped them cover 800 miles in just 20 days. By the 2nd day of the month of November, 36 days after leaving Spain, they anchored off an island Columbus named Dominica, as he had discovered it on a Sunday, known in Latin as Dies Dominica, or Day of the Lord. Dominica is part of the Lesser Antilles or Caribbean islands. Unable to find a good anchorage there, Columbus sailed on and soon discovered several other islands, including Marie Galante, Guadeloupe, Antigua, Puerto Rico, and Saint Martin. On Guadeloupe, they came across a magnificent waterfall cascading over a high, jagged cliff, its roar audible from 3 miles away. At first, they saw no natives, as the islanders had fled to the mountains. Eventually, some of the Spaniards brought back 2 boys who claimed they were not originally from the island but had been forcibly taken by the locals from a neighboring island. Soon after, they found 6 women who desperately begged for help, explaining that they had been captured and enslaved. The women revealed a horrifying truth. The island's natives regularly roasted and ate male prisoners taken in battle, while the women were enslaved despite their pleas for mercy. This confirmed what Guacanahari, the chief Columbus had met earlier, had told him about the brutal practices of these islanders. Almost everywhere Columbus landed, he was met with hostility, and he found grim evidence of cannibalism. Bones and skulls of slaughtered people were scattered around many of the dwellings. Horrified by these sights and eager to reunite with the Spaniards he had left at Hispaniola, Columbus decided not to stay on these newly discovered islands. Communicating with the locals seemed impossible. Therefore, he resumed his journey and, on the 21st day of the month of November, safely arrived at a spot just a day's journey from Fort Navidad. Some of the crew sent ashore returned with alarming news. They had discovered the bodies of 2 men on the beach, tied to a piece of wood shaped like a cross. Due to decomposition, they could not tell if the men were Europeans or natives. This unsettling report made Columbus anxious about what else might be revealed. He spent a restless night and at the first light of dawn hurried to find out if his fears were justified. As he neared the heights of La Navidad, he jumped into a boat and rowed to shore. To his shock, there was no sign of the Spaniards he had left behind or the fort they had built. Instead, he found only fragments of the fort, torn clothing, broken weapons, and scattered utensils. The scene told him all he needed to know. Further evidence of the colonists' grim fate came when they discovered 11 bodies nearby, all showing signs of a violent death. While they were mourning this tragedy and discussing plans for revenge, the brother of Guacanahari arrived and gave a detailed account of what had happened. According to him, soon after Columbus had left, the men he left behind ignored the advice and instructions Columbus had given them. Instead of treating the natives kindly, they acted unjustly and committed many abuses. The locals, who had once seen these white men as celestial beings, soon realized they were not only no better but much worse than other men. The commander of the fort tried to rein in his men, but they refused to listen, defying his authority and spreading out across the island to steal and commit acts of violence. Eventually, they even began to plunder the territory of the cacique of Cibao, where gold was found. Enraged by their actions, the cacique and his people took up arms, overwhelmed the Spaniards, and attacked the fort, burning it down. Some of the Spaniards were killed defending the fort, while others fled by boat but soon drowned. The brother of Guacanahari explained that despite the Spaniards' behavior, Guacanahari had remained loyal and fought on their behalf, receiving a wound in battle that he was still suffering from. Columbus's men were eager to seek violent revenge, but Columbus, wise and humane, refused. He urged them to consider how vital it was for the safety of the island and their new colony to gain the trust and goodwill of the natives. He visited Guacanahari and found him still suffering from a wound inflicted by native weapons, not European ones, confirming his story. The cacique continued to show his loyalty to Columbus in every way possible, offering 800 valuable shells, 100 gold plates, and 3 gourds filled with grains of gold. In return, Columbus gave him several European trinkets. After this, Columbus led his people to a more comfortable and healthier area near the mouth of a small stream. There, he decided to establish a properly fortified city to provide a safe and convenient place for the settlers to live. Everyone was required to help with the work, and through their combined efforts, the first European city in the New World was built. Columbus named it Isabella in honor of the Queen. During the construction of the city of Isabella, Columbus faced countless challenges that only someone of his determination could overcome. The Spanish settlers, naturally lazy and now facing the hot climate, were even less willing to work. They complained loudly about the hard labor they had not expected. Many had come with dreams of finding treasure and living an easy life, only to be forced to work under the scorching sun alongside hired laborers. To make things worse, the unhealthy environment led to widespread sickness, and essential supplies began to run out. The settlers grew increasingly frustrated, wondering where the promised Golden Mountains were. Columbus, however, insisted that they finish building the city before they could explore the interior of the island. This dissatisfaction grew daily and eventually led to a conspiracy against Columbus's life. Fortunately, the plot was discovered before it could escalate. The ringleaders were captured. Some were punished, while others were sent back to Spain as an example. At the same time, Columbus urgently requested reinforcements and supplies from the king. To calm his restless men and prevent further rebellion, he allowed a group to explore inland under the command of Chevalier Ojeda. Later, Columbus led his expedition to impress the natives with a display of European military power. His men marched in tight formation with flags waving and music playing, while cavalry maneuvers astonished the locals, who had never seen horses and thought horse and rider were a single creature. Their route passed through the gold-rich region of Cibao. Everything the natives had said about the area was confirmed. While the locals did not actively mine the gold, since they had no use for it, the Spaniards found gold grains in nearly every stream washed down from the mountains. Thrilled with this discovery, they returned to Isabella. However, they found the city in terrible condition. Food supplies were quickly dwindling because the focus on construction had left no time for farming, and sickness was spreading rapidly. Despite these setbacks, Columbus drew on his past experiences to deal with the crisis. He worked to restore order and calm among the settlers. Once he had managed to stabilize the situation, Columbus decided to set out on another voyage of exploration. He appointed his brother, Don Diego, as regent and left Pedro de Marguerite in charge as captain general. Then, with one large ship and two smaller caravels, he sailed westward. The first major discovery on this voyage was the island of Jamaica. Columbus sent a boat crew to check if the harbor was deep enough to enter, but they were quickly confronted by armed natives in canoes, who tried to prevent their landing. When peaceful attempts failed, the crew was forced to retreat under a hail of arrows. Once it was determined that the harbor was safe, Columbus brought the ships in, made repairs, and explored the island. He found the conditions in Jamaica far superior to those in Hispaniola, so he wasted no time claiming the island for Spain. From there, he sailed to Cuba to determine if it was an island or part of the mainland. This journey proved to be filled with even more dangers than any he had faced before. A terrible storm hit in a treacherous region completely unknown to him. He found himself surrounded by rocks and sandbars that threatened to destroy his ships at any moment. The vessels ran into shallows, causing leaks so severe that the crew had to work continuously at the pumps to keep them afloat. They also faced hunger and thirst. If they managed to find food, Columbus was always the last to eat, prioritizing the welfare of his companions over his own. Throughout this ordeal, he had to deal with the growing dissatisfaction of his men, who complained and criticized him even though he courageously shared in all their hardships. During his stops in Cuba, Columbus learned from the natives that the land was indeed an island. In some areas, the sky was so crowded with birds and butterflies that it blocked out the sun, making the day as dark as if a storm were approaching. On the northern side of the island, they found the ocean filled with small, low-lying islands, which Columbus named the Queen's Garden. While exploring these islands, they encountered a canoe full of fishermen who came aboard Columbus's ship to offer him their catch. In return, Columbus gave them small gifts to secure their friendship. The constant physical and mental strain eventually took a toll on Columbus's health. Completely exhausted and unable to sleep, he fell into a lethargy that left him without sense or memory. Fearing for his life, the crew quickly sailed back to Isabella. There, Columbus found a remedy more powerful than any medicine. His beloved brother Bartolomeo had arrived with more men and supplies sent by the king. The two brothers, deeply attached and of similar mindsets, had been separated for 13 long years. Bartolomeo's arrival could not have come at a better time, as Columbus's illness and the dire situation in Hispaniola required the skills of a brave, intelligent, and experienced leader. Without Bartolomeo's timely arrival, both Columbus and the colony would likely have been lost. This unexpected good fortune not only aided Columbus's recovery, but also allowed him to stabilize the struggling colony. While Columbus was away, the situation had spiraled into chaos. 2/3 of the colonists had succumbed to diseases common in the region. Pedro de Marguerite, who had been appointed captain general, turned against Columbus and fled to Spain on one of the ships, taking his co-conspirator Bill with him. Meanwhile, the soldiers Margaret left behind had scattered across the island, committing numerous crimes. This caused the previously friendly natives to grow hostile, leading to many Spaniards being killed. The situation threatened to destroy the fledgling colony. Worst of all, the once peaceful natives had finally begun to grasp the danger they faced. Through bitter experiences, they realized that if these strangers stayed longer, it would mean famine and enslavement for them. In their simple lifestyle and the warm climate, they required very little food. A handful of maize and some roasted cassava was usually enough. But now, they noticed with concern that one Spaniard could eat more in a single meal than 4 of them would eat in an entire day. It was only a matter of time, they feared, before the island's resources would be consumed, leaving them to face starvation. Seeing the violence and greed of the Spaniards day after day, the natives finally realized that they had to either fight for their freedom or risk losing it forever. They found the courage to act and gathered their forces. The various tribes, led by their caciques, united into a large army of around 100,000 warriors. Despite the grave danger to the colony, Columbus did not back down. However, he deeply regretted the hostility that had developed among the natives due to the actions of some of his men. His original hope that these people might peacefully embrace the Christian faith was now shattered, and he faced the grim reality that bloodshed was inevitable. Amidst this tense situation, Columbus received a visit from his loyal friend, Guacanahari. This steadfast ally, who had long supported the Europeans, was now viewed with suspicion and hostility by the other caciques. For his protection, he felt compelled to side with the Spaniards. Columbus gratefully accepted his offer of help and welcomed the support of Guacanahari's warriors. Chapter 6. The Rise of European Dominance in the Caribbean. With both armies facing each other, the moment had arrived that would decide either the Spaniards' survival or the natives' freedom. On one side stood 100,000 natives, armed with clubs, spears, and arrows tipped with bone or flint. On the other side were only 200 infantry and 20 cavalrymen, supported by a small force of natives led by Guacanahari. The difference in numbers was staggering, but the Europeans made up for it with their advanced weapons, horses, hounds, and military tactics. The risk was high for both sides, and the outcome was uncertain. Columbus launched a fierce attack. The sound of musket fire, the neighing of horses, and the howls of the hounds terrified the natives. After a brief and disorganized resistance, they fled. Some were cut down by swords, others were trampled by horses or torn apart by the hounds, and many were taken prisoner. The rest fled into the forests. This battle marked the beginning of European control over the natives, leading to their enslavement. Columbus wasted no time in solidifying his victory. He traveled across the region, quickly establishing Spanish rule wherever he went. Within a few months, the entire island was under Spanish control. Meanwhile, Margaret and Bill, Columbus's enemies, had reached Spain. Columbus knew they would do everything possible to undermine his achievements and convince the suspicious Spanish king that his discoveries were insignificant. He foresaw a storm coming that could destroy him unless he took action. His only option was to send the Spanish court a clear sign of the wealth promised by his discoveries. To do this, he made harsh demands on the natives for tribute. Those living in the gold-rich regions were ordered to deliver a set amount of gold dust every 3 months, while the others had to provide 25 pounds of cotton. These demands were more than the natives could manage. Accustomed to a simple and idle life, they could not endure the daily toil of searching for gold and gathering cotton like slaves. As their food supply dwindled, the Europeans cruelly pushed them to meet the quotas. In desperation, the natives decided to stop planting maize and cassava, hoping to force the Europeans to leave by starving them. They destroyed their crops and fled to the mountains, living off fruits and wild plants. However, this plan backfired. The natives soon faced starvation themselves and were struck by disease. Many died, while the survivors were too weakened to bear the burdens imposed on them. Meanwhile, the Spaniards, supported by their efforts and supplies from Europe, suffered little from the natives' desperate scheme. As the situation worsened, the storm Columbus had anticipated finally arrived. Marguerite and Bill had so undermined his reputation that the Spanish court began to lose confidence in him. The king decided to send a representative, Juan Aguado, to the West Indies to investigate the situation. Unfortunately, Aguado lacked the skills and insight needed for such a task. Full of self-importance, he arrived in Hispaniola and treated Columbus with contempt. He invited anyone, Spaniards and natives alike, with complaints against Columbus to come forward. Without questioning the validity of these grievances, he collected as many as possible to present Columbus in the worst light. This new challenge weighed heavily on Columbus. He decided to return to Spain and explain the situation directly to the king and queen, trusting in their sense of justice. Before leaving, he appointed his brother Bartolomeo as adelantado, which means governor of the island, and put a man named Roldan in military command. This choice would later prove to be unfortunate, as Roldan was an unprincipled adventurer. On the 10th day of the month of May, Columbus set sail from the island with 2 new ships and 220 men. Wanting to make the fastest voyage possible, he chose a direct course to Spain. Unfortunately, he was unaware of how much this decision would extend the journey. He had yet to learn, as every sailor knows today, how unpredictable the trade winds can be on such a route. It is now common knowledge that ships returning from the West Indies should steer farther north to avoid these contrary winds. Soon, Columbus encountered the challenges of the route he had chosen. However, being someone who rarely gave in to obstacles, he pressed on with even more determination. Despite his efforts, The journey dragged on, and after 3 months, there was still little hope of reaching their destination. To make matters worse, their food supplies dwindled, and the crew was left with only a small amount of bread. Desperation took hold, and the sailors became furious, plotting to either kill the Indians on board or throw them overboard to preserve food for themselves. In this crisis, Columbus showed the compassion that was a hallmark of his character. He refused to allow such inhuman actions and reminded his crew that the Indians were their companions, facing the same hardships, and had just as much right to the remaining food. His words temporarily calmed the crew. Before they could renew their cruel demands, their troubles came to an end. Spain's coast appeared on the horizon. Aware of the value of his achievements, yet maintaining the humility typical of truly noble spirits, Columbus approached his sovereign to prove his innocence against false accusations. However, he found no need to defend himself. The moment the king and queen saw him, they remembered their previous respect for his accomplishments and felt ashamed for having doubted him. As he presented just some of the valuable goods he had brought back, their suspicions disappeared. They sought to honor him in every way possible. Columbus's requests were promptly granted, and his existing rights in the newly discovered lands were confirmed, with additional privileges added. His main priority was to ensure the success of the colony he had established in Hispaniola, so he requested more settlers and workers, including farmers and artisans of various kinds, to meet the needs of the growing settlement. Unfortunately, not many Spaniards were eager to sail back to the New World. Many who had returned from the previous voyage were not as excited about the new lands as expected. They found that gold required hard work to obtain, and most of them disliked the labor. Additionally, the climate in Hispaniola did not agree with many. They returned to Spain with pale, sickly complexions, sarcastically saying they brought more gold in their faces than in their pockets. To recruit people for Hispaniola, Columbus suggested sending prisoners, particularly those sentenced to death or the galleys, to work in the colony's mines. The courts of Spain were ordered to send these criminals to the West Indies. While this did provide a workforce, it also brought many problematic individuals who caused Columbus significant trouble later on. Despite a royal decree that Columbus should receive everything he needed, equipping the fleet was a slow process. Funds were not readily available, and opponents of the venture created further obstacles. Finally, 2 supply ships left for Hispaniola in the month of January, in the year 1498, but Columbus himself had to wait until the 30th day of the month of May to set sail with 6 poorly manned ships. Determined to explore a new route, Columbus aimed to find the real Indies. After reaching the Canary Islands, he continued to Cape Verde, a discovery made by the Portuguese. He sent half of his fleet directly to Hispaniola with fresh supplies for the colony, urging the captains to sail as quickly as possible. After passing Cape Verde, Columbus anchored at a small, barren island known as Salt Island, where the Portuguese had sent their lepers for healing. The island was overrun with turtles that swam from the African coast to lay their eggs in the sand. The turtles were easy to catch, and eating their flesh or bathing in their blood was believed to cure leprosy. The island also had a large number of goats, descendants of just 8 goats left there by the Portuguese. Lacking trees and streams, the lepers on the island had to survive by drinking rainwater collected in holes. At that time, only 7 lepers remained on the island. Columbus continued sailing south until he reached the equator, where his fleet became trapped in a dead calm. The sun beat down fiercely, and there was no escape from its scorching heat. The wine casks split, the drinking water turned foul, and the food spoiled. Even the ships grew so hot that the crew feared they might catch fire. Along with the unbearable conditions and his crew's despair, Columbus was also suffering from gout, brought on by stress and lack of sleep. He lay in constant pain, tormented by the heat and the deteriorating state of the ships, without even a sip of fresh water for comfort. Finally, relief came in the form of a heavy rainstorm. The crew could hardly stay on deck due to the downpour, but they were able to collect fresh water. Although the rain did little to cool the intense heat, it renewed hope in the nearly lifeless sailors. They begged Columbus to change course and not continue further south. This time he agreed and turned the ships to the southwest. After sailing in this new direction for several days, on the first day of the month of August in the year 1498, a sailor shouted, "Land! Land!" from the masthead. To the starving and exhausted crew, it was like heavenly music. The island they spotted had 3 prominent hills, so Columbus named it Trinidad, a name it still bears today. The island is close to the mouth of the Orinoco River, which flows into the sea with such force that it creates dangerous conditions for the fleet. The waves crashed violently against the ships, and one vessel was caught in the strong current, facing the danger of being wrecked. Columbus skillfully navigated through this chaotic turmoil of water, steering the fleet through a treacherous channel he aptly named La Boca del Drago, or the Dragon's Throat. Columbus was now certain he had reached the mainland, as he believed no island could contain a river as vast as the Orinoco. He continued sailing west along the coast, stopping at various points to explore. The natives he encountered were similar to those in Hispaniola, but appeared more intelligent, courageous, and had lighter skin. They adorned themselves with gold ornaments and pearls, which they willingly traded for simple European trinkets. On one occasion, while Columbus was on shore seeking fresh air to ease his illness, a native approached him confidently, without any escort. The man removed his red silk cap and placed a gold crown on Columbus's head. Columbus assumed the man was a cacique and made sure he was treated with respect. These locals wore soft woolen cloths wrapped around their heads and covered their bodies from the waist to the knee with similar fabric. They had long, well-groomed hair and used shields, bows, and arrows as weapons. Columbus wanted to stay longer to learn more about the interior of the land, but the poor condition of his ships and his ongoing illness forced him to stop exploring and set sail for Hispaniola. On his way, he discovered the island of Margarita, later known for its pearl fisheries. Exhausted and overwhelmed by illness and constant worry, he finally reached the colony, ready to take a much-needed rest from his hardships. Rest and recovery were still out of reach for Columbus. Unexpected challenges, new hardships, anxieties, and dangers awaited him, so severe they would have tested even a healthy man. During his absence, his loyal brother Bartolomeo had led an expedition to a nearby region and started building a new city, which he named San Domingo, in honor of their father, Domenico. This city, now known as Santo Domingo, became one of the most important in the West Indies, and the island itself gradually adopted its name. While developing this new city, Bartolomeo ventured into parts of the island that Columbus had not yet explored, leaving Captain General Roldan in charge of those who stayed behind. However, Roldan betrayed the trust placed in him, revealing his true nature. Roldan had been plotting to overthrow the Columbus family and take control of the island for himself. With Bartolomeo away and Columbus absent, he saw his chance. He exploited the situation, turning the remaining Spaniards against Bartolomeo and his younger brother, Diego. Many sided with Roldan, who took up arms against Bartolomeo and aimed to seize the supplies and storm the fort at San Domingo. Fortunately, alert officers guarding the fort thwarted this plan, forcing Roldan and his followers to retreat to another part of the island. There, they sought to rally the natives to their cause, quickly plunging the entire island into chaos. This was the dire situation Columbus found himself in upon his return. To make matters worse, he discovered that the 3 ships he had sent with supplies from the Canaries had not arrived, leading him to fear they had been lost at sea. It seemed like everything was falling apart. In reality, storms and ocean currents had driven the ships off course. After being tossed around the ocean, they finally reached Hispaniola, but near Roldan's stronghold. Cunningly, Roldan concealed his rebellion from the ship captains, persuading them to send some crew members ashore. Promising to guide them to San Domingo, Roldan instead recruited them to his cause, allowing these criminals to loot and plunder. This was the first unfortunate outcome of Columbus's earlier decision to bring criminals to the New World. A few days after Columbus's arrival, the 3 ships finally appeared at San Domingo. However, they came without the much-needed men, and most of the supplies had already been used up. Roldan, pleased with Columbus's weakened state, boasted of his power. Columbus, filled with deep anger, chose not to retaliate. Instead, he sought a meeting to see if Roldan and his followers could be convinced to return to their duties through kindness. He announced that anyone who regretted their actions would be forgiven if they returned to their allegiance. He even extended this offer to Roldan, promising to restore him to his former rank. Through this magnanimous gesture and persistent efforts, Columbus succeeded. He managed to quell this dangerous uprising without shedding any blood. Columbus sent a ship to Spain to inform the court about his discovery of the mainland and his success in quelling the rebellion. Along with the news, he sent samples of products he had found, including pearls, gold, colorful cloth, and finely woven fabrics. He also included his diary, which detailed the course of his voyage and important events. Meanwhile, Roldan and his accomplices sent their reports to the king, filled with false accusations against the admiral to justify their actions. Unfortunately, the king chose to believe Roldan's lies over the truthful accounts from Columbus. Around this time, the King of Portugal, regretting his earlier decision to reject Columbus's proposals, decided to spare no expense in finding a sea route to the East Indies. To correct his mistake, he organized an expedition led by the skilled and experienced navigator Vasco da Gama. The journey faced seemingly insurmountable challenges, but da Gama possessed the same unbreakable spirit as Columbus. He was undeterred by the unknown African coasts, treacherous rocks and sandbars, the searing heat, and violent storms. He pressed on, eventually reaching the southernmost point of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. For Vasco da Gama, this was just the beginning. He continued sailing, navigating around Africa to reach the city of Melinda on the coast of Zanzibar. There, he was surprised to find a highly civilized society, quite different from the tribes he had encountered along the African coast. The people of Melinda, who practiced Islam, traded with foreign nations and were familiar with many aspects of advanced civilization. Driven to complete his mission, da Gama sailed onward, and on the 20th day of the month of May in the year 1498, finally reached the coast of India. He landed in Calicut, in the Malabar district on the Indian Ocean. Da Gama was amazed by the country's wealth, the value of its goods, and the refined manners of its people. However, he realized that he had nothing of value on his ship to trade, as the trinkets that had impressed the African tribes were of little worth to the Indians. Not wanting to overstay, he soon turned back, eager to report the success of his expedition to the king. Around the same time, Columbus discovered the New World, another region, already known but previously of little practical benefit, was connected to Europe through navigation. As a result, wealth began flowing into Portugal in great quantities. The Spanish watched with envy as their neighbors reaped the rewards, while they had yet to cover the costs of their new territories. Enthusiasm for exploration spread rapidly, with kings, republics, nobles, and merchants all seeking to finance expeditions for the potential riches and adventures that awaited. One of these adventurers, the knight Ojeda, who had accompanied Columbus on his second voyage, convinced some merchants from Seville to outfit 4 ships for voyages under his command. He secured permission for these journeys and a contract that violated the existing agreement between the Spanish court and Columbus. The Bishop of Badajoz, who oversaw West Indian affairs and was an enemy of Columbus, took advantage of Columbus's illness to provide Ojeda with Columbus's diary and charts for the voyage. Ojeda was joined by a well-known Italian nobleman, Amerigo Vespucci, Latinized as Americus Vespucius. Using Columbus's diary, Ojeda reached the island of Trinidad and, after many adventures, arrived at Hispaniola, where he allied with Roldan. However, after being betrayed, he returned to Spain. While Ojeda's voyage was not particularly significant, it brought Amerigo Vespucci into the spotlight. It is unclear in what role Vespucci accompanied Ojeda. Vespucci claimed he made the journey in service of the crown. In his accounts, he sometimes exaggerated his importance, but his writings reveal a genuine love for adventure and the natural beauty he encountered. Despite popular belief, Vespucci did not suggest that the newly discovered lands be named after him. This idea came after his death, as his writings played a key role in publicizing these new territories. Recognizing the vast profits from the sea route discovered by da Gama, the King of Portugal equipped a large fleet filled with European goods for trade. A man named Cabral was appointed commander of this fleet. Knowing the dangers of sailing along the African coast, Cabral chose to steer westward as soon as he crossed the equator. After some time, he unexpectedly found himself on the coast of a vast land, the rich country of Brazil. Cabral claimed it for the King of Portugal and sent one of his ships back with the exciting news. Thus, different parts of America were gradually uncovered, further proving that Columbus's ideas had been correct all along. Chapter 7. From Discoverer to Prisoner, the Tragedy of Columbus. Roldan and his followers did everything possible to shift the blame for the disorder onto Columbus. Meanwhile, many disgruntled settlers returned to Spain, angry that instead of finding riches, they had faced only hardships and poverty. These people saw Columbus as the sole reason for their failed hopes, and soon accusations and curses against him spread throughout Spain. Encouraged by his powerful enemies, they bombarded the king and queen with demands for compensation for their losses and complaints about the injustice and mistreatment they claimed to have suffered under Columbus. Their ragged clothes and pale, starved appearance stirred up sympathy, making their claims seem credible. Whenever the king and queen appeared in public, these discontented individuals, often stirred up by Columbus's enemies, surrounded them, begging for mercy and speaking out against him. Given the naturally suspicious nature of King Ferdinand, it is not surprising that he began to believe their accusations. Even Queen Isabella, who had been Columbus's loyal supporter, eventually turned against him. Under mounting pressure, Ferdinand and Isabella decided to send an investigator to the West Indies to examine Columbus's administration. The man chosen was Francisco de Bobadilla, a nominee of Columbus's enemies, who was eager to take over his position. Bobadilla was given full authority to remove Columbus if the charges against him were found to be true. He could take control of the island's defenses, ships, warehouses, and other properties, fill all official positions, and send back to Spain anyone he deemed necessary to restore order. Unfortunately, Bobadilla was completely unsuited for such a task. He was a presumptuous and arrogant man, inflated by the unearned authority granted to him. From the moment he took up this role, he saw Columbus as a criminal. Ironically, by the time Bobadilla was appointed, Columbus had already succeeded in restoring peace and order to the island. The discontented settlers were satisfied. The Spaniards and natives had accepted the laws, the rich mines were being developed, and the colony's future looked promising. When Bobadilla arrived in San Domingo, Columbus was still away in a distant part of the island, ensuring his orders were being implemented. A fair-minded judge would have waited for his return before taking any action, but Bobadilla had not come to listen to Columbus's side of the story. He had come to condemn him and seize power. As soon as he landed, he went straight to Columbus's residence and declared it his own. He then seized all of Columbus's belongings. Following this, he announced publicly that the king had sent him to remove Columbus and resolve any grievances people had against him. To further solidify his position, he released all those whom Columbus had imprisoned and encouraged them to voice their complaints about the injustices they had supposedly suffered. Bobadilla then sent a messenger to Columbus, ordering him to appear immediately before his tribunal to explain his conduct. Along with this order, he included a royal document granting him full authority. Columbus was stunned by this unexpected news. He read the document repeatedly, unable to believe that it could be true. Here was the man who had discovered the New World, now summoned by someone unworthy of the role, accused of no specific wrongdoing. Columbus was overwhelmed by the injustice of it all. Despite this, he knew what he had to do. Columbus had soldiers and his brother Bartolomeo with him, and it would have been easy to defy this unjust judge with force. But his strong sense of duty and respect for authority, even when it was cruelly misused, guided his actions. Without hesitation, he went to San Domingo to face his accuser. Upon his arrival, he went to see Bobadilla. Bobadilla coldly, without explanation, said,
"Restrain this man immediately with irons, and remove him from my presence without delay."
The order was carried out immediately. Columbus was shackled and taken aboard a ship. Thus, the man who had achieved what many would have considered impossible was treated with dishonor. If he had lived in ancient Greece or Rome, statues would have been built in his honor, but here he was, treated like a criminal. Columbus was disgraced and removed from the land he had claimed for his king, a land he had suffered greatly to discover. He endured this final blow with a quiet dignity that spoke more of his innocence and strength of character than any words of protest could have. He was taken away, but his trials were far from over. Bobadilla was determined to make him suffer even more. Knowing that Columbus might find some comfort in the fact that he alone was imprisoned, Bobadilla also had his brothers arrested and chained, forbidding them from communicating with each other. After a sham trial, he sentenced them to death. However, he lacked the courage to carry out the execution himself, fearing he might not be able to justify it. Instead, he sent a report of the proceedings to Spain, along with the prisoners, hoping that his powerful ally, the Bishop of Badajoz, a fierce enemy of Columbus, would see to it that the sentence was carried out. As soon as the ship carrying Columbus set sail for Spain, the captain, who still respected him, approached to remove his chains. However, Columbus refused and said,
"I insist that these chains remain in place. They were fastened upon me by the command of my sovereigns, and I shall continue to bear them until they give the order for their removal. I have always been, and will forever remain, obedient to their will. These bonds serve as a testament to my unwavering loyalty and submission to their authority, even in the face of such unjust treatment. Let them serve as a reminder to all who see me of the price of discovery and the fickleness of fortune."
And so, he wore the chains until the ship reached Spain. Bobadilla had ordered that upon their arrival, the prisoners be handed over to the Bishop of Badajoz, ensuring they had no chance to gain the support of Queen Isabella. However, an honorable man named Martin secretly left the ship and delivered a letter from Columbus to the Queen, informing her of the situation. The court was shocked, as they had never expected Bobadilla to abuse his authority to such an extent. They recognized the injustice of this treatment and realized it would cause outrage throughout Europe. Immediately, a messenger was sent to release Columbus and his brothers. The Queen also requested that Columbus come to the court and sent money to ensure he could dress appropriately for his rank. Columbus accepted the request and went to meet the king and queen. Entering the room where they awaited him, he fell to his knees. Overwhelmed by the monstrous injustice he had suffered, it took him a long time to find his voice. Finally, gathering his strength and knowing he was innocent, he spoke against the lies and slanders of his enemies. His detailed explanation convinced Ferdinand and Isabella of his innocence. They expressed their regret and assured him that they had not been aware of what had happened. To prove their sincerity, they removed Bobadilla from his position and offered Columbus gestures of kindness and promises of future protection. However, when it came time to select Bobadilla's successor, it became clear that the king and queen's doubts about Columbus were not entirely gone. They appointed Nicholas de Ovando to the position instead. Ovando was given a fleet of 32 ships and a company of 2,500 people, many from distinguished families, along with all the supplies needed to support the colony. Columbus protested this new injustice. He pointed out that he had been cleared of any wrongdoing, yet was still being stripped of his rightful position. But his protests were met with vague replies or ignored altogether. Filled with indignation, Columbus could not hide his deep sense of betrayal. Wherever he went, he kept his chains as a reminder of the ingratitude he had faced. He hung them in his room and later ordered that they be buried with him. No fleet as strong as the one sent with Ovando had ever sailed to the West Indies. While he left with his 32 ships and 2,500 men, Columbus had to stay behind, watching someone else benefit from what he had achieved through immense hardship. Shortly after Ovando's departure, a violent storm hit, scattering the fleet. When news reached Spain that the fleet was lost, the king, stricken with grief at the thought of losing so many of his best men, shut himself in his palace for several days. Luckily, the report turned out to be false. The fleet survived the storm, losing only one ship, and arrived at its destination on time. Ovando reached Hispaniola just in time. If he had been delayed, the colony might have been ruined by Bobadilla's foolish and unfair rule. Bobadilla had tried to secure his power by allowing chaos and unlawfulness. He had reversed all of Columbus's sensible regulations, permitting everyone to act without restraint. While Columbus had worked to protect the native people from Spanish abuse, Bobadilla left them vulnerable to all kinds of mistreatment. He divided the natives among his greedy followers as slaves and assigned them to work beyond their capacity. The harsh labor and cruelty of their overseers caused many of these naturally fragile people to die, threatening the survival of the entire population. Ovando's first act was to remove Bobadilla and send him, along with Roldan, back to Spain to face the consequences of his misconduct. Following royal orders, Ovando abolished slavery, declaring all the native people free. He then restored order by enforcing strict laws and allowed gold mining on the condition that half of the gold mined would belong to the king or the governor of the island. Meanwhile, Columbus, weighed down by his troubles, occasionally appeared at court, which continued to ignore his pleas. He was not asking for mercy, but for justice. Holding the royal contract, he demanded the fulfillment of the promise that he would be the governor of the new lands. He believed that, on his last voyage, he had reached the mainland. His earlier belief that this land was part of India had mostly faded. Now he speculated that there might be a vast ocean separating the mainland from India. He also thought there might be a strait in the region of the Isthmus of Darien that could provide a passage to this ocean and eventually to the Indies. Columbus believed it was crucial to find out if there was a passage through the region, as it would make the route to the Indies much shorter and easier than sailing around Africa as the Portuguese had discovered. Despite the harm the king had done to him, Columbus's desire to make discoveries for the benefit of the world outweighed his anger over being replaced and denied his rights. Showing great character, he decided to set aside all that had been done to him and, despite his age, risk the challenges of another voyage. When he informed the court of his intentions, they eagerly agreed, happy to have him out of their way. Columbus was a constant reminder of the injustice they had done to him, so they were glad for the chance to get rid of him. They also hoped that his voyage might yield them some benefits. The order to prepare the expedition was quickly given. But what a pitiful fleet it was! Columbus was provided with only 4 small, inadequate ships, the largest of which was about half the size of an ordinary cargo vessel. With this meager fleet, he was expected to cross a distant, unknown ocean and find a new route to the East Indies, from which he had promised to bring back great riches. It was a meager preparation for such a massive task. Most people would have given up on what seemed like an impossible mission, but Columbus remembered his first voyage and trusted these weak vessels just as he had trusted the ones that had taken him across the ocean to the West Indies the first time. He boarded confidently, joined by his brother Bartolomeo and his 13-year-old son Ferdinand, who would later write about his life. On May the 9th, 1502, 10 years after his first voyage, the now gray-haired Columbus set sail from Cadiz, heading toward the Canary Islands. The journey went well, except that one of his ships, the largest, was so slow that it struggled to keep up with the others. Columbus then steered toward Hispaniola to exchange the sluggish ship for a faster one. Upon reaching the island, he sent a message to Ovando, the governor, explaining why he had come and asking permission to enter the harbor. However, the governor refused, claiming Columbus was supposed to follow a different route and was not authorized to stop at Hispaniola. Columbus had no choice but to accept this humiliation, though he likely expected it. Despite his anger, he warned Ovando that, based on his experience, a severe storm was coming. He requested to enter the harbor and wait out the storm, but Ovando ignored him. The governor dismissed his advice as the ramblings of a foolish weather prophet. Meanwhile, the Spanish fleet bound for Spain set sail. The heavens seemed to punish those who had wronged Columbus. The storm he had predicted arrived with full force. Columbus stayed close to the shore, and his ship survived. However, Ovando's fleet, heavily laden and headed for Spain, fell victim to the storm. Both Roldan and Bobadilla paid the price for their betrayal and drowned in the sea. When Columbus later learned of their fate, he believed it was divine justice to punish the traitors. Angry and hurt by how he had been treated, Columbus left the island he had discovered, the same island that had denied him shelter, and sailed west toward the mainland. This journey was filled with challenges, but he eventually reached an island called Guanaja, near the coast of Honduras. Upon anchoring, he sent his brother Bartolomeo ashore with some armed men to explore. As Bartolomeo approached the shore, he came across a large, well-built Indian canoe. The boat was around 8 feet wide and had a palm leaf roof, resembling a large gondola. It carried men, women, and children, about 25 people in total. When they were caught up, they surrendered peacefully, despite being armed. A search of their cargo revealed woolen cloths, pieces of clothing, large bands of fabric worn by the women, wooden swords with sharp edges, copper hatchets, and a few other metal items. Their food was similar to that in Hispaniola, but they also had a drink made from maize, which resembled beer, and cocoa beans, which they used as both food and currency. These were the first cocoa beans Europeans had ever seen. Notably, the modest clothing of these natives stood out. Columbus was glad to have met these people, hoping they could provide valuable information. He treated them kindly, exchanged European goods for their own, and let them know they were free to leave whenever they wished. One older man, who seemed to be a leader, stayed on board for a while and provided Columbus with useful information for future interactions with the local people. From this man, Columbus learned of a vast region further west that was rich in gold. The people there wore golden crowns and heavy gold rings on their fingers, arms, and ankles. They had tables, chairs, and chests made of gold, as well as corals, spices, and other valuable items in abundance. This region was what we now know as Mexico. Although Columbus was eager to explore this land of riches, his priority was still to fulfill his mission of finding a passage he believed was nearby. After much thought, he decided to abandon the quest for gold. Ignoring the complaints of his crew, he set sail eastward along the mainland coast, continuing his search for the elusive strait. Chapter 8. Trapped in the Wilderness of Veragua. Columbus continued his journey along the coast of Honduras, sailing eastward in search of the straits that the natives had mentioned. As they traveled, they encountered people who were different from the ones they had seen before and seemed even more primitive. These people were completely naked, ate raw meat and fish, and had ears stretched down to their shoulders from the many ornaments they wore. Their bodies were tattooed with images of deer, lions, and other animals. The more important individuals among them were marked by white and red woolen head coverings. Some had black skin, some were red, and others painted their lips, nostrils, and eyes with stripes of different colors. Columbus sailed further along the coast, though progress was slow due to unfavorable winds and troublesome currents. Eventually, he reached a cape that stretched to the south, where the winds became favorable, allowing them to sail more easily. Columbus named this cape Gracias a Dios, which means thanks to God. At one point, while anchored near the shore, they were approached by boats filled with armed natives who initially seemed intent on preventing them from landing. However, once the natives realized the Spaniards meant no harm, they approached confidently and offered to trade their weapons, which included crossbows, clubs, and spears made from black hardwood tipped with fish bone, as well as woolen waistcoats and small pieces of pale gold that they wore around their necks. Columbus gave them various European trinkets without taking anything in return. This seemed to confuse and upset the natives, and when the Spaniards declined their repeated invitations to come ashore, they took it as a sign of mistrust. In response, the natives sent an older man of distinguished appearance and two young women wearing gold necklaces to the Spaniards as ambassadors. The old man carried a banner, likely as a sign of peace, and asked to meet with Columbus. Columbus welcomed them warmly, provided them with food and clothing, and sent them back to shore pleased with their treatment. The following day, Columbus's brother went ashore and noticed that all the gifts the Spaniards had given the natives were lying in a pile. It seemed that the natives were hesitant to accept gifts without offering something in return. As he landed, two of the leading natives took him by the arms and asked him to sit between them on the grass. He complied, asked them several questions through an interpreter, and had his secretary write down their answers. However, when the natives saw the pen, paper, and ink, they became frightened and rushed back to their people. They believed the secretary was a magician using his writing tools for magic and feared he would harm them. Despite efforts to calm their fears, the natives refused to approach the Spaniards again until they had performed a ritual to ward off the supposed magic. They threw a powder that created smoke, directing it toward the magician to neutralize any harmful effects. After this, Bartolomeo visited their village. The most notable structure there was a large wooden building used as a burial place. Inside, he found several corpses wrapped in woolen cloths, one of which was embalmed. Each grave was marked with boards featuring animal figures, and some even had likenesses of the deceased decorated in various ways. The next day, Columbus kept a few natives on his ship to learn more about them. The other natives misunderstood this and believed he intended to hold them for ransom. They sent messengers with 2 young wild hogs, offering them as payment for their release. Columbus explained that the natives on his ship were not prisoners and that no ransom was necessary. He bought the hogs from them, which seemed to ease their concerns, and they left feeling satisfied. After several more days at sea, Columbus reached the mouth of a river and anchored. He sent a boat's crew ashore, but a large group of armed natives blocked their landing. Over 100 of them waded waist-deep into the water, waving their lances, blowing horns, beating drums, splashing water at the Spaniards, and spitting to show their disdain. Columbus had instructed his men to stay peaceful, so they watched from a safe distance until the natives tired of their aggressive display. Eventually, communication was established, and the Spaniards exchanged some small trinkets for 16 gold plates, worth around 150 ducats. The following day, the natives mistook the Spaniards' peaceful approach as a sign of weakness and threw spears at the approaching boats. To send a clear message, the Spaniards fired a cannon and wounded one of the natives with an arrow, causing panic. This gave the Spaniards a chance to land without causing further harm. They signaled to the fleeing natives who, realizing the newcomers meant them no harm, returned and peacefully exchanged their gold for European goods. After exploring the area, Columbus continued along the coast in search of the elusive straits. He eventually reached a gulf with a spacious, safe harbor and a large, densely populated town surrounded by well-tended farmland. Columbus named this place Portobello because of its beautiful harbor. The friendly locals brought finely woven cloths and various foods, happily trading them for simple items like nails, needles, and bells. From there, Columbus sailed about 8 miles to what is now the city of Nombre de Dios. Bad weather forced him to stay for several days, during which he repaired his increasingly damaged ships. When he set sail again, the weather worsened, and he was forced to dock in a small harbor, which he named Refuge. Initially, the natives there were also friendly, but a sailor's disrespectful behavior provoked them. Confident in their numbers, they launched a coordinated attack, attempting to board the ships. Columbus tried to calm them, but when it became clear his efforts were failing, he ordered a cannon to be fired to scare them. To his surprise, the noise did not frighten them. Instead, they mocked it. Realizing he needed to show the cannon's power, he aimed a larger one at a hill crowded with natives. The cannonball flew through the crowd, and, shocked by the destruction, they fled into the woods. These natives were the most striking Columbus had seen so far. They were slim, well-proportioned, and did not have the protruding stomachs common among other groups. The harbor was full of large alligators that would come to the shore to sleep, filling the air with a distinctive aroma. While these creatures seemed timid, they would attack if provoked, trying to seize and eat their assailant. Christopher Columbus began to lose hope of finding a passage between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. As fierce storm winds threatened his fleet, he decided to turn back and headed to a place called Veragua, where the natives claimed there were rich gold mines. This short journey became one of his most difficult and dangerous due to a severe storm that lasted several days and the rapid decline of their food supplies. After 8 months at sea, all they had left to eat were some scraps of ship's biscuits that had become spoiled in the hot, damp climate. The bread was barely edible, but the crew ate it anyway, often hiding in dark corners so they would not have to see what they were putting in their mouths. In this miserable state, they noticed the large number of sharks circling the ships. Some of Columbus's superstitious crew saw these creatures as bad omens, signs of misfortune. However, despite their fears and their general dislike for the oily flesh of sharks, the starving sailors eagerly ate the shark meat, finding it far more palatable than the rotten biscuits. Before Columbus could reach the gold-rich region of Veragua, he was forced to anchor at various spots due to storms. In one of these places, he saw a strange sight. The natives lived in houses built high in the trees, as if they were birds. They chose this way of living to protect themselves from floods, wild animals, and enemies. They climbed into their tree houses using ladders, which they pulled up behind them to keep others out. Finally, Columbus and his crew arrived at Veragua, hoping for great riches. They anchored at the mouth of a river, which Columbus named Belen. Soon, they met some of the local people who told them about a nearby city ruled by a prince named Cuba. Columbus decided to sail upriver, and once they arrived, he sent his brother Bartolomeo ashore to greet the prince. The prince had already heard about the arrival of the foreigners and came to meet Bartolomeo, where they exchanged friendly greetings. The next day, the prince visited Columbus, who welcomed him warmly and won his friendship with gifts of simple European items. While this was happening, Bartolomeo gathered information about the location of the gold mines and set out to find them. When the Spaniards reached the site, they found pieces of pure gold lying at the base of a tree, clear evidence of the metal's abundance in the area. They collected the scattered gold pieces and returned to Columbus with news of their discovery. Columbus decided to establish a colony at the mouth of the Belen River. Enthusiastic work began, and in a short time, they built wooden houses covered with palm leaves. Columbus chose 80 men to stay as colonists and put his brother Bartolomeo in charge. He provided them with the necessary tools and materials for a comfortable and secure life, along with plenty of fishing equipment, as the waters were rich in fish. One type of fish, similar to anchovies, was caught unusually. When chased by larger fish, these smaller fish would leap out of the water onto dry land. The natives would cover their canoes with palm leaves and row along the river while splashing their oars, and the fish, mistaking the leaves for land, would jump into the boats, making them easy to catch. When Columbus had finished his preparations and was ready to sail back to Spain, he received shocking news. Prince Cuba, unhappy with the Europeans settling in his land, was planning to burn down the colonists' homes. Columbus discussed the situation with his brother, and they decided the only way to prevent this was to capture the prince. Bartolomeo took on the task and led a strong force straight to Veragua, where Cuba's house stood on a hill. When they arrived, Cuba asked Bartolomeo not to enter his home and said he would come out to meet them. Bartolomeo took only 5 men with him and instructed the others to follow from a distance. He told them that when they heard a musket shot, they should rush in, surround the house, and capture everyone inside. As Cuba came forward to greet his guest, he was immediately taken prisoner. Bartolomeo gave the signal, and the Spaniards quickly surrounded the house, capturing everyone without a struggle. The captured prince was then taken to a ship, bound hand and foot. It was night when they pushed the boat off into the water. Quibia complained that his hands were in pain from the tight ropes. His captors, wanting to show some kindness, loosened the ropes but still held on to them. Taking advantage of the situation, Quibia suddenly leaped overboard. Despite efforts to pull him back in, he escaped into the darkness, using his swimming skills to get away. Quibia soon sought revenge. He attacked the colony by sneaking through the dense forest with his men. They stormed in with loud cries, launching burning arrows at the palm leaf roofs of the new houses, hoping to set them on fire. However, they were too far away to hit their target effectively. A fierce battle followed, and the colony was on the brink of destruction. Bartolomeo, showing great courage, charged into the middle of the attackers with a small group of men. His boldness caused the enemy to retreat after suffering casualties, though Bartolomeo was wounded in the chest by an arrow. Fortunately, the injury was not fatal. The colonists hoped this victory would force Quibia to back down, but they were wrong. The prince became more determined to seek revenge. Realizing they were in grave danger, the colonists decided it was safer to take their chances on the sea in their old worm-ridden ships than to face daily attacks from the fierce natives. When Columbus heard of their decision, he understood and helped them board his ships, using canoes lashed together for the journey. The only option left for Columbus was to try to reach Hispaniola with his damaged ships, as sailing to Spain was out of the question. However, it seemed like nature was against him. A violent hurricane, accompanied by thunder, churned the ocean and tossed the ships around so fiercely that the crew lost all hope. Despite Columbus's efforts to use his experience to guide them, the men were too frightened, confused, and exhausted to follow his orders. As they neared the mainland, one of the ships was lost, and the others began leaking so badly that the combined efforts of everyone on board barely kept them afloat. In desperation, Columbus steered toward Cuba, hoping to make the necessary repairs. But this hope was shattered when another terrible storm drove them away from the coast, throwing the two ships together so violently that everyone thought the end had come. However, by some miracle, the ships held together. Eventually, they reached the coast of Jamaica, and Columbus deliberately ran the ships aground to prevent them from sinking. The ships were beyond repair, so he and his crew took shelter on the wrecks. Columbus preferred staying on the stranded ships for two reasons. First, they would be safer from attacks by the natives than on land. Second, he could keep his men from provoking the natives with hostile actions. Columbus secured the ships as best as he could, covered the decks to provide shelter, and forbade his men from going ashore. Before long, the natives discovered the stranded ships and, following Columbus's orders, were greeted in a friendly manner. In response, they showed goodwill and brought a variety of food to trade for the simple trinkets the Spaniards carried. The natives willingly exchanged 2 geese for a piece of tinsel, a loaf of bread for a glass bead, and offered their most valuable items for a bell. Meanwhile, Columbus and his companions discussed how they could leave the island. It seemed their only option was to request help from the governor of Hispaniola and ask him to send a ship. But there was one problem. How could they send a message? They had no boat, and Hispaniola was 30 miles away from Jamaica. After some thought, a solution was found. Thanks to Columbus's friendly attitude toward the natives, they agreed to sell him one or more of their canoes. These were crude, hollowed-out tree trunks, barely boats at all. They were difficult to row, easily capsized by the slightest gust of wind, and could be flooded by even the smallest waves. Despite the life-threatening risk of attempting a long sea journey in these crude canoes, 2 brave men from Columbus's crew volunteered to try to rescue the admiral and their fellow sailors. One was Mendez, a Spaniard, and the other was Fiesco, a Genoese. Each had his canoe, accompanied by 6 Spaniards and several native rowers. The plan was for Fiesco to return to Columbus with news if they successfully reached Hispaniola, while Mendez would continue to San Domingo to fulfill the tasks Columbus had given him. The two set off, cheered on by the well-wishes of those left behind. They rowed tirelessly for 2 days and 2 nights under the scorching sun, but soon feared they had lost their way and were drifting past Hispaniola into the open ocean. Their situation grew dire as their water supply ran out, and they began to suffer terribly from heat, thirst, and exhaustion. Some of the native rowers collapsed and died, while the others feared the same fate. In their desperation, they resorted to holding seawater in their mouths to cool their tongues. Finally, a glimmer of hope appeared. As night fell and the moon rose, they noticed a shape on the horizon. It was a cliff. This sight gave them hope that they were near an island, so they summoned their remaining strength to row towards it. Upon arrival, they found it was just a barren rock with no apparent food or drinkable water. Despite this, they jumped out of their canoes and searched the rocky surface in despair. In the cracks of the rocks, they found rainwater that had collected and was as pure as any from a cistern. Overjoyed at this discovery, they drank eagerly, forgetting to pace themselves. Some suffered greatly from drinking too much, with a few even losing their lives, while others faced lasting health issues. Having quenched their immediate thirst, they now faced a crucial decision: what to do next. Fortunately, they discovered fish washed up on the shore, providing enough food to survive for the moment. The leaders decided to rest on the rocky island during the heat of the day and resume their search for land in the cooler evening hours. As night fell, they set off again, rowing through the moonlight. At dawn, their struggle was finally rewarded. They reached the west coast of Hispaniola. Chapter 9: A Fight for Justice, Columbus's Final Voyage. Day after day, Columbus's men anxiously scanned the horizon, hoping to see Fiesco returning with the news that Mendez had successfully reached Hispaniola. But their wait was in vain. Fiesco never appeared. Despair set in, and the crew became convinced that both men were lost, along with any hope of being rescued from the island. Their frustration soon turned into open revolt. They shouted, cursed, and even threatened Columbus's life. It seemed like the great leader, who had survived so many dangers, might now fall victim to the rage of his men. At that time, Columbus was bedridden, suffering from a painful ailment, while many of his crew were also ill. The few who remained on their feet had aligned themselves with 2 brothers named Porus. The elder Porus, a heartless man, approached Columbus and asked why he was not making an effort to sail back to Spain. Columbus calmly replied that he had no means of returning, much as he wished to, and that if anyone could find a way, he would gladly follow. His composed response did not affect Porus, who retorted that it was no time for excuses and that he intended to set sail himself. Porus then shouted to the crowd,
"Anyone who desires to join me on this journey, who yearns for freedom and the chance to return home, step forward now. Let us take our fate into our own hands and leave this forsaken island behind. Who among you dares to seize this opportunity?"
His words sparked a full-blown mutiny. Most of the crew immediately declared they would follow him. Columbus, suffering from gout, tried to get out of bed to calm the situation, but his attendants, fearing for his life, held him back. Bartolomeo, Columbus's brother, rushed in, pike in hand, and forced the mutineers to retreat. Despite this, Porus and his followers seized 10 small boats Columbus had acquired from the natives and prepared to depart. Those who had stayed loyal began to waver, with many climbing into the boats, asking to join the mutineers. Columbus, Bartolomeo, and his son Ferdinand watched helplessly as most of the crew abandoned them. The few faithful men who remained gathered around Columbus's bed, discussing their next move. Columbus thanked them for their loyalty and encouraged them to stay steadfast, promising that their honesty and dedication would be rewarded once their current ordeal ended. Meanwhile, the mutineers rode eastward, shouting with triumph. When they reached Hispaniola, they looted the native villages, abused the people, and even encouraged the natives to blame Columbus for their hardships. They told the locals to demand compensation from him, and, if he refused, to kill him. They painted Columbus as the source of their suffering, fueling hatred against him. The mutineers then forced a group of captive Indians to row their canoes. However, just 4 miles into their journey, a violent storm arose, filling their small boats with water. In a cruel attempt to lighten the load, they decided to throw the Indians overboard. Some were already killed before the others, in a desperate bid for survival, jumped into the sea, clinging to the canoes for support. But the mutineers heartlessly pushed them away, leaving them to drown. 18 Indians lost their lives this way, and only a few were spared because the Spaniards realized they needed some rowers to make it back to Jamaica. Despite his great suffering, Columbus bore his troubles with his usual strength. Although he was sick, he cared for the other ill men with the kindness of a father. His compassion and concern were rewarded, and soon he had the joy of seeing everyone restored to health. However, a new problem arose. The local Indians who had been supplying food began to worry that these Europeans would never leave and would consume all their resources. Their growing fear, along with the abuses they suffered from the mutineers, turned them against the Europeans, and they stopped bringing supplies to the ships. Columbus, however, found a clever way to handle the situation using his knowledge of astronomy. He knew a lunar eclipse was coming and used this to regain the respect and hospitality of the natives. He called a meeting with their leaders, telling them he had something very important to say. Through an interpreter, he explained that he and his companions were people who knew the God who made the heavens and the earth. This God, who protected the good and punished the wicked, would also punish them if they continued to refuse to provide food. As a sign of this punishment, he warned that the moon would take on a red and angry appearance the next night. At first, the natives laughed off his prediction. However, as the moon began to darken and the darkness grew, they became filled with fear. They cried out, begging Columbus to pray to his God to forgive them, promising to give him everything he needed. Columbus agreed and went into his cabin, knowing that the eclipse would soon pass. After a short time, he came out and reassured them, saying that God was pleased with their change of heart and would not punish them. As a sign of his forgiveness, the moon would return to its normal appearance. When this prophecy came true, the natives were overjoyed and praised the Christian God, generously bringing Columbus and his men all the supplies they needed. 8 long, dreary months had passed since Mendez and Fiesco had left for Hispaniola, and there had been no word from them. Everyone was certain they had perished, and Columbus's companions lost all hope of being rescued. In their despair, they considered abandoning their leader to join the mutineers who were roaming the island and living off their plunder. Just as they were about to act on this plan, they were shocked to see a European ship anchored not far from shore. The ship did not stay long. Its captain quickly came ashore in a small boat, handed Columbus a letter from the governor, along with a cask of wine and 2 sides of bacon, and then just as suddenly returned to his ship and sailed away. The letter contained nothing more than empty words. Governor Ovando of Hispaniola wanted Columbus to perish, fearing that if the admiral returned to Spain, he might successfully claim his rights and threaten Ovando's position. Ovando was keen to know just how dire Columbus's situation was, and whether delaying help might achieve his cruel goal. This, as some historians suggest, is why he sent a messenger to observe the admiral's condition and then sail away. Others argue that Ovando feared Columbus might use the excuse of his shipwreck to come to Hispaniola and seize power by force. Columbus told his men that the ship had left because it was too small to carry them and their supplies, but that Mendez and Fiesco had reached Hispaniola safely and were arranging for a larger ship to rescue them. In truth, he had received no news about what had happened to either of them. Despite being weakened by a fever contracted on the rocky island, the brave Fiesco was eager to return to the admiral and share the good news of their successful voyage. However, none of his companions were willing to risk the perilous journey again. No amount of persuasion or threats could change their minds, so he was forced to go to San Domingo against his will. There, he and Mendez repeatedly begged the governor to allow them to buy a ship to rescue Columbus. However, the governor kept delaying the process, using various excuses to carry out his plans. Meanwhile, Columbus made several attempts to convince the rebels to return to their duty. Not only did they refuse, but they also demanded that Columbus give them half of all the clothing and supplies on the stranded ships. If he refused, they threatened to take them by force. When Columbus denied their demands, the rebels prepared to carry out their threat. Still unwell, Columbus sent his brother Bartolomeo with a small armed force to confront them. He ordered Bartolomeo to try to reason with the rebels and avoid violence unless necessary. Bartolomeo followed these orders, approaching the rebels with an offer of peace. However, they mistook his friendly approach for a sign of weakness, and the battle began. 6 rebels planned to attack Bartolomeo directly and would not stop until they saw him fall. But Bartolomeo met them with courage, and with the support of his small group, charged the rebels with such force that he quickly secured a victory. Several rebels were killed, others captured, and the rest fled. Among the prisoners was Porus, the leader of the rebellion, whom Bartolomeo himself had disarmed, though he suffered a hand wound in the fight. Soon after, the remaining fugitives sent messages to Columbus, begging for mercy. Always more inclined to forgive than to seek revenge, the admiral granted their request. Order was finally restored. Everyone returned to their duties, and all were forgiven, except for the defiant leader Porus, who remained in chains as a just punishment for his actions. Mendez and Fiesco tirelessly tried to persuade the governor of Hispaniola to let them buy a ship to rescue Columbus and his crew from Jamaica. The governor hesitated for a long time, but finally, fearing that they might appeal to the Spanish court if he continued to leave Columbus stranded, he agreed. Thus, when all hope seemed lost, Columbus was finally offered a way out. After spending a full year struggling with hardship and despair, the ship arrived. Everyone boarded joyfully on the 28th day of June in the year 1504 and sailed to San Domingo, reaching it on the 13th day of August. The governor, hiding his true feelings behind a mask of false respect, ordered that Columbus be received with full honors. However, while pretending to honor him, the governor secretly plotted against him. He arranged for the leader of the mutineers, who was supposed to be sent to Spain in chains, to request an immediate release and even threatened to bring charges against those who had remained loyal to Columbus. The admiral, who had endured many injustices from this deceitful man, found the strength to bear this final insult. Eager to leave the land whose discovery had brought him nothing but trouble, Columbus made preparations to depart as soon as another ship could be fitted out. On the 12th day of September in the year 1504, he set sail for Spain. However, the same misfortunes that had plagued his earlier journey struck again. A violent storm caused so much damage to one of his ships that it had to return to Hispaniola. The other ship was badly battered and it seemed unlikely it would complete the voyage. It even lost its foremast and mainmast along the way. Despite these setbacks, Columbus pressed on. With his half-wrecked ship, he managed to cover 700 miles of open ocean and eventually, with great difficulty, reached the harbor of St. Lucas in Andalusia in the early days of November in the year 1504. He had only been in Spain for a few days, trying to recover from his exhausting journey, when he received devastating news. His patron and only supporter, Queen Isabella, had died on the 26th day of November in the year 1504. Columbus had relied on her as his last hope for obtaining his rights. Now that she was gone, what could he expect from King Ferdinand, who had always been biased against him? As soon as his health somewhat improved, Columbus hurried to the court to report all that had happened. However, he was met with a cold reception. His valid complaints about the many wrongs he had suffered were ignored, and his reasonable request to have his rights restored was dismissed with weak excuses. This great man, who had achieved so much, was left to spend his final years in the futile pursuit of justice from an unjust ruler and mercy from an unfeeling king. Eventually, his long and bitter suffering came to an end. Worn out by the trials and hardships he had endured, Columbus passed away in Valladolid on Ascension Day, the 20th day of May in the year 1506. His final words were,
"Into thy hands, O Lord, I commit my spirit."
He died as he had lived, peacefully and with unwavering faith in God, even during the darkest times. His soul went on to face the same judgment as all, including kings. Initially, his remains were laid to rest in the monastery of St. Francis in Valladolid. 6 years later, they were moved to the Carthusian monastery in Seville, where King Ferdinand had a grand memorial built in his honor. In the year 1536, his body was transferred to the island of San Domingo, the site of many of his discoveries. When the island was ceded to the French, his remains were taken to Cuba, where they now rest in the cathedral of its capital. Near the high altar, a bust of Columbus stands in a niche, and beside it is a silver urn containing the last traces of the famous explorer. Columbus was tall, well-built, and had a dignified presence. He had a long face, an aquiline nose, soft blue eyes, and a fair complexion. In his youth, his hair was auburn, but it turned white early due to his many hardships and struggles. His life was marked by constant shifts between success and failure, praise and slander, and honor and degradation. Few were the moments of true happiness, as almost every day brought new physical challenges, difficulties, or injustices. Despite this, he was strong, both in body and spirit, displaying remarkable endurance and agility. His manner was friendly and approachable. He was courteous to strangers, kind to his attendants, and cheerful with friends. He lived simply, dressed modestly, and during his expeditions shared in the hardships of his companions without seeking any special comforts for himself. Columbus had a strong interest in the sciences and excelled beyond many scholars of his time. Most notably, his deep and genuine piety guided him throughout his life. Although he had a temper, he often managed to keep it in check, showing incredible patience and gentleness, even when faced with attacks from his unworthy adversaries. This was the man who was so misunderstood and wronged by his contemporaries, yet whose name has become immortal. His life and legacy continue to inspire love and admiration in all who value virtue and human greatness. Chapter 10: Diego Columbus, The Fall of Cuba. After the death of Columbus, his eldest son Diego pushed for the king to honor the contract that granted the Columbus family governance of the West Indies. However, his efforts were in vain, as King Ferdinand treated him with the same prejudice and injustice that his father had faced. Despite Diego's pleas, the king continued to ignore his requests for justice. Finally, Diego decided to take his case to the judge responsible for all matters related to the Americas. To the judge's lasting credit, he dared to rule against the king and in favor of Columbus's heirs, stating that Diego was entitled to the rights denied to his father. However, even with this ruling, the king might have disregarded it had Diego not used his connections. With his elevated status from the court's decision, Diego sought to marry a woman from one of Spain's most prestigious families, the niece of the Duke of Alva. The powerful family supported Diego and pressured the king to fulfill the contract. Reluctantly, the king conceded to Diego's demands. Ovando was recalled, and the Columbus family, victorious over jealousy and injustice, set sail for Hispaniola. Diego traveled to Hispaniola with great pomp, accompanied by his brother, uncle, and wife, living in the luxury befitting his father's significant contributions to Spain. Many high-ranking individuals joined him, and soon the colony transformed, becoming a thriving community. Many of the most prominent families in Spanish America are descendants of those who accompanied Diego. During Ovando's administration, a man named Juan Ponce sought permission to establish a colony on the island of Puerto Rico, which Columbus had discovered. His request was granted, and he sailed there with many adventurers, drawn by reports of abundant gold. The natives, similar to those of Hispaniola, welcomed the newcomers warmly, seeing them as celestial beings. In a gesture of eternal friendship, one of their chiefs even took the name Juan Ponce Aguaynaba. However, it did not take long for these so-called celestial friends to reveal their true nature. They became so inhumane that the natives soon realized these men were far from divine. To confirm their mortality, the native leaders decided to put one of them to the test at the first opportunity. A young Spaniard, feeling completely safe as he wandered around the island, decided to spend the night at the cabin of a native chief. The chief welcomed him warmly and offered him hospitality. The next morning, the chief assigned some of his men to accompany the Spaniard, partly to carry his belongings and partly to act as guides. However, they had been given secret instructions on what to do. When they reached a river, one of the natives offered to carry the Spaniard across on his back. Once they were in the middle of the stream, the native deliberately fell, plunging the Spaniard into the water. With the help of his companions, he held the Spaniard underwater until he drowned. They then dragged his body to the shore. Despite this, the natives still held a strong belief that the Spaniards were immortal, so they were not entirely convinced that the young man was dead. Even though there were no signs of life, they stayed by his body for 3 days, constantly praying for forgiveness in fear that he might come back to life. Finally, when they were certain he was dead, they rushed to tell their chief the joyful news: the white men could die. The chief quickly spread the word to other leaders, and they all agreed to fight back against their oppressors. However, what could an unarmed, peaceful people do against well-trained soldiers equipped with swords, guns, horses, and hounds? While they had strength in numbers, with more than 100 natives able to surround and kill a single Spaniard, this came at a high cost. Once the Spaniards discovered their plan to kill them one by one, Juan Ponce gathered his forces, mostly made up of experienced soldiers, and began hunting down the natives in their hiding places. They killed many and enslaved those who survived. While Ponce carried out this brutal campaign, reinforcements arrived from Hispaniola, further convincing the superstitious islanders that the dead Spaniards had come back to life. Believing they could not defeat these seemingly immortal enemies, the natives submitted to the harsh reality of slavery. In recounting the violence in Puerto Rico, historians of the time could not praise enough the cunning and bravery of a hound named Becerrillo, who became famous for his actions. They claimed that the dog could distinguish between friendly and enemy natives. The Indians feared 10 Spaniards with Becerrillo more than they feared 100 without him. Before the revolt, they would give the Spaniards all the provisions, gold, and even slaves they demanded, just to avoid being attacked by the dog. One story about his intelligence goes as follows. Some cruel Spaniards enjoyed tormenting an elderly Indian woman they did not like. One day, they sent her off with a letter and soon after set Becerrillo loose to chase her down. As the dog charged at her, the woman fell to her knees, showed him the letter, and pleaded,
O noble and merciful hound, I implore you to show compassion and spare my life. I am but a humble messenger, tasked with the important duty of delivering this letter to the Christians. Please, in your wisdom and kindness, allow me to complete my mission and return safely. Your reputation for discernment precedes you, and I trust that you can see the urgency and sincerity of my plea.
The dog, as if he understood her, wagged his tail and returned to his masters without harming her. The happiness of these poor natives was lost forever. The Spanish conquests and discoveries expanded rapidly. Diego's first move to extend his power and increase royal possessions was to establish a colony on the island of Cubagua, discovered by his father, for pearl fishing. These pearls form in certain mussels and oysters found in both the sea and rivers. To collect them, divers have to retrieve the shellfish from the bottom. Some believe pearls are the result of a disease in the shellfish, but pearls certainly begin as a juice inside the shellfish's body that gradually hardens. Most pearl fishers are poor men who dive underwater to collect them. Diego believed that the native Indians, skilled in swimming and diving, could be more profitably used for pearl fishing than mining. He sent many of them, along with European overseers, to Cubagua, where his father had discovered pearl-rich waters. While the fisheries brought in large profits for both the king and the governor, the work was so hazardous and unhealthy for the natives that most of them perished. The colony eventually had to move to the nearby island of Margarita because Cubagua was too barren. Around this time, Diego took control of Jamaica. A colony was established, and soon the natives faced the same grim fate as those in Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. Next came Cuba. Diego assigned its conquest to Velázquez, a man known for his exploits during Columbus's lifetime. Many hopeful fortune seekers joined him, and they landed on the island's eastern point. This area was ruled by a chief named Hatue, who had escaped slavery in Hispaniola and settled there. As a sworn enemy of the Spaniards, he had long anticipated their arrival and had spies in Hispaniola to warn him of their movements. Now, he saw the impending disaster at his doorstep. He gathered his people, warned them of the threat, and urged them to fight for their freedom to the last drop of their blood. They all bravely pledged to follow him. Hatue declared,
"That is good, but we need to do one more thing if we want to successfully protect ourselves from these tyrants. Do you know why they never come here to look for their god? Do you know who their god is? Look here, this is him."
As he spoke, Hatue showed them a basket of gold, declaring that this worthless metal was the Christians' god. He explained that it was for this gold that they were risking everything and trying to take over the island. Hatue said,
"Let us pay homage to this deity of the Christians and seek its divine protection. Perhaps by honoring their God, we may find favor and shield ourselves from their wrath. Though it may seem strange to us, we must try every means at our disposal to safeguard our people and our land."
Following their custom, they began singing and dancing around the basket. The celebration continued late into the night, only stopping when they were all exhausted. The next day, Hatue gathered them again and warned that despite the honors they had paid to this god, they still might not be safe as long as it remained on the island. Hatue said,
"Concealing this precious metal is futile, my friends. These invaders are relentless in their pursuit of gold. Their greed knows no bounds. They would not hesitate to cut open our very bodies if they suspected we had swallowed it. No, we must take more drastic action. I propose we cast every last piece of gold into the depths of the sea, where it can never again be found on our sacred land. Only then can we hope to rid ourselves of their cursed presence and preserve our way of life."
The people immediately followed his advice, collecting all the gold they had and throwing it into the ocean. Despite this, the Spanish soon arrived, their flags waving on the shores. Hatue bravely led his people into battle, but they were defeated and forced to flee. Hatue was captured, and to make an example of him, the Spaniards sentenced him to be burned alive. As he stood tied to a stake, surrounded by wood, a Franciscan monk approached him to explain heaven, the place of eternal peace. Hatue asked,
"Enlightened one, I must inquire, do these Spanish conquerors who have brought such suffering to our lands also find passage to this heavenly realm you speak of?"
The monk replied,
"Yes, but only those who have lived virtuous lives and followed the teachings of our Lord. Heaven welcomes those who have shown kindness, compassion, and righteousness in their earthly journey."
Hatue responded,
"Then I must respectfully decline such an offer. I would rather face the unknown depths of oblivion or endure the torments of any other realm than risk encountering even one of these cruel oppressors in your promised paradise. The very thought of sharing an eternity with those who have brought such suffering to my people fills me with dread and revulsion. If heaven welcomes such individuals, then it is not a place I wish to inhabit, regardless of its supposed bliss."
This brutal act of cruelty struck such fear into the hearts of the Cuban natives that they gave up all thoughts of resistance and willingly submitted to Spanish rule. In just a few days, the Spaniards managed to conquer one of the largest and most beautiful islands in the world without losing a single man. Around this time, various expeditions were also being organized to explore the mainland and establish new colonies. Ponce, the conqueror of Puerto Rico, heard a tale that was widely believed by the local people. They spoke of an island to the north that had a magical fountain. According to the story, anyone who drank from this fountain would become young and strong again. As unlikely as it sounded, the story intrigued the gullible Ponce so much that he decided to search for this mysterious fountain. With that goal, he set sail from Puerto Rico, heading north toward the Lucayan Islands. After reaching the 26th degree of north latitude, he turned westward and discovered a large, beautiful land. We now know this to be part of North America, which Ponce later named Florida, either because of its lush, blooming landscape or because he found it during the Easter season, known in Spanish as Pascua Florida, or Flowery Easter. Thus, a foolish legend led to a significant discovery. Soon, the Spaniards turned their attention to another part of the world, previously unknown to them. They suspected that there might be a land similar to the rich region of Mexico in the same latitude, but no one had yet ventured to find it. The man who would eventually reveal this land to Europeans was the renowned Hernán Cortés.